You are listening the compilation of the most interesting Reddit stories. Let's dive into them. Welcome to r/pro revenge story from Thunderkurg, where OP's patriarchal father cheats on his mom despite the fact that she stood by him when he was struggling with cancer. He then expects her to ignore his betrayal, but OP and his sister take brutal revenge by destroying all his property. Now, OP's father is left as a miserable poor old man. I was called an ungrateful brat, so I acted as such. This whole thing happened a year prior, but the repercussions are still happening, and I hope they continue until the day the bastard dies. This will be long, so buckle in. Background. Growing up, me and my sister had no love toward our father whatsoever. I'm not going to bore you with details, but alcoholic, abusive, violent are the few that come to mind. When my sister got accepted into a much better, but also further high school than our local, she moved immediately and rarely visited. We were 10 years apart, so I was 4 at that time. I grew up resenting her for leaving me to deal with his, because all by myself. But now I understand better, and we're on good terms. My local factory was so big that it supported my whole town. Virtually everyone worked there, so everyone knew each other. My parents too, but then it's purchased by the defense ministry, and they decided to cut off anyone without at least a high school degree. My mother was let go, and this was after she'd had me 4 months. My father, however, made it until retirement and was granted military status. Basically, they gave him an honorable rank, so his pension would almost double. But also you'd have to act accordingly because, in terms of speaking, you are military personnel now. My childhood was absolute nightmares. So needless to say, I turned out to be an absolute mess. Anger management and mental instability are notably the worst, and I'm still working on them. When I turned 18, I enlisted. 2 major benefits. It didn't cost money, and I could never come home if I didn't want to. For me, it was literally a highway out of hell. Fast forward 3 years later, I got an honorable discharge. Turned out I had actual mental problems. Who would have known? I got a bulk load of money and even more in the following months when they were able to process my military insurance. I came home to find my town incredibly underwhelming, and my father hadn't changed a bit. Not wanting to spend the rest of my life in this hellhole, I took what I could and moved to the city where my sister was living. The last words dear old dad said to me was, "You'd never make it," because apparently being discharged for a mental illness showed that I was a coward. Also, I think he didn't like that I was tougher than the boy who used to obey his every word that I once was, and that I'd stood up for myself more in the few weeks I've stayed with him than the entire 18 first years of my life. I moved to a new environment, took up a blue-collar job, I was pretty beefy thanks to the military, and decided to pursue a career in IT, all the while taking care of my mental health. When it all started. Somewhen during this time, he got diagnosed with cancer. I was told it was not dangerous, but operations were required. My sister had actually reconciled with him, partly because of my mother, a few years prior, and would occasionally bring my niece home to visit them. She was quite successful, so she decided to pay for the whole thing. Operations, treatment, hospitals, recoveries, it was all hers. She paid for this while moving into a new house and buying her first car. Those things are pretty expensive in my country. My father had a huge bank account because of his pension, but he didn't have to pay a single penny. After a year or so, he's on recovery, and all in all, things were good. During this time, I was struggling with working and studying, living paycheck to paycheck, and had to rely on a social program to get treatment for my illness. I visited him after every operation, though it wasn't anything tearful. If he didn't poke me, I was fine. After nearly a year of staying at my sister's house, he and my mother headed home after his doctor gave him a go. At that time, I was looking for a new job because the current job was horrible, and it made my mental health actually worse. And I was lucky to find one where most of my skills were transferred and I had enough time to finish my studying. One day, my mother called in tears and asked me to come home that weekend. She told me that my father had been seeing someone else. Now, I must admit I'd not put anything behind this man, but then I thought she was paranoid. She still is, up to this day, about everything. And I resented the thought of going home on a 4 hours trip, both just for something that's utterly unimportant. So I calmed her and swept it under the rug. Fast forward a few months, I got another call, this time from my sister. She came to visit that week with my niece to inform them that she was 3 months pregnant. What was supposed to be a happy union turned into an absolute... Apparently, when my father left his phone unattended for a few minutes, his mistress sent him a very sexy picture, and my mom saw it pop up. Needless to say, all hell broke loose. My sister said that was the first in many years that she saw my mother screamed bloody murder at my father. And when he tried to hit her, my sister threw herself in between, which prompted her husband to throw himself in between, because, you know, she's 3 months pregnant. It all ended in a very teary trip back to our city after hours of hurling insults at each other. The only good thing that came out of it was my mother somehow was able to bring his phone with her. We convinced my mother to get a divorce, but she's the submissive housewife who thought divorces were worse than boiling live puppies, and I think back then she's still somewhat hoping that he'd turn around. They've been together for almost 35 years at that point, so I figured something must have been there. She didn't want it, so we dropped it and decided to cut him out for good. Lo and behold, half a year after the incident, my father's side of the family started to contact me. I have a strict no-call policy, where the only people allowed to call me outside of work hours are my mother, my sister, her husband, 3 of my best friends, and only recently, my boyfriend. So to my bamboozlement, my father, his sister, my aunt, his mother all called within a day. They suddenly acted so nice and convinced me to come to visit them. Obviously, that was all a ruse. After the incident, my father's side all blamed my mother and said she should have kept it a secret and not made a mess for the family's sake. They also disavowed me and my sister because we were ungrateful brats after we did not accept their ultimate argument, he's your father after all. Out of morbid curiosity, I ventured back alone to see what it was about. Turned out, they wanted to sell his house. It was on my grandmother's land. Back when he was about to undergo his first operation, we didn't know how it'd turn out. So he transferred the house to my name because apparently, inheriting a dead person's estate in my country is a living nightmare. Out of convenience, we convinced my grandmother to give me the land as well since she was very old, 80 at the time. This was back when we were on good terms. I knew for sure they would rather gouge their eyes out than follow up with any of that if it had happened a year later. I smelled something in the air. I couldn't place it, but I knew it was there. So I told them, nicely, that I would think of it and immediately went back, faking an emergency. A plan formed when I was driving back, and that's the first time I'd been so pleased about anything, I actually cracked a smile. I went to my sister's immediately. My mom had been staying with her, and laid out a plan. After a year living in the city, my mom was much more open-minded, and it only took a few convincing for her to agree with the plan. My sister contacted a lawyer and asked what our options were. Because both the house and the land were in my name, they had no claim to them, and any paper that didn't have my signature on it would be considered useless under the law. They could try and claim it was rented out, but then they'd have to move far away in hope that I'd never be able to locate them, and I knew it'd be too much trouble for a couple of old folks. They could claim it's his life achievement, but because he and my mother never divorced, it's technically half hers as well. This is when I came up with an idea. I asked the lawyer, what if my mother filed for a divorce? He said it's highly unlikely the court would reward my mother's full claim unless we could prove that he was unfaithful before the separation. To his surprise, I could. Remember the phone that my mother brought back from that day? It was smashed during the fighting, but generally still in one piece. She asked me to throw it away a few days after, but my lazy just brought it back to my place and threw it in the loft. Sufficient to say, it provided us with more than enough proof of his indecency. The execution. After weighing our options, I called to inform my father that I would come home the next month to make an announcement. He was eager to hear it. Upon my arrival, they were so nice and sweet and whatnot, but after I introduced my lawyer, it's like they flipped a switch and suddenly became vile and violent. I presented him with 2 options: relinquish any claim to the house or be served with a lawsuit. In my country, marital violations are 6 months probation minimum, up to 2 years in prison. After a lot of screamings and name-callings and feet-stomping tantrums, he kicked us out, so naturally, I assumed he chose the latter. At the first hearing, my mom, me, and my lawyer were present. It turned out to be another screaming contest in which he made up all kinds of lies about my mother. At some point, My lawyer leaned in to tell me that if the officer didn't stop his rantings, it's likely that they were buddies and asked me to let him handle things. The officer told us this case wasn't a priority. It would take months to process. We wouldn't like the paperwork. It's best to settle this out of court. My lawyer politely declined and told my father to expect another hearing soon, under much less friendly circumstances. He tried one more tactic in between, which was calling all the relatives and telling them how my mother was a bitch and I was an ungrateful brat in hope of creating some kind of pressure on us. Very few of them took his side, and even if all of them did, I would have never let him go that easy. In the second hearing, he finally cracked and agreed to my terms, which were relinquishing any claim he might have with the house and divorcing my mom. Basically, the only person who has any claim to the house now is my mother. I agreed to let him keep living in it for the rest of his life though, but not anyone else, aka his mistress, whom he was basically living with. The revenge. This was where my work started. First, my sister gathered all the receipts from all the medical billings she has paid for his treatment. A few of them were missing, but we were able to put up a huge folder. I also shit my pants learning how expensive cancer treatment could be. Not a fan. When we had a general sum of the money we billed him for it. This is very unethical in my country since children are expected to take care of their parents, but we threw that out the window long ago. We also knew it was not a criminal case, so we just went to small court claims and then sent in bailiffs to collect, which was just this lady. She went on with an I don't give a f*** attitude, and when he failed to comply, she sent in the thugs, I mean the police, to start seizing assets. So say goodbye to wooden furniture. Smart TV, a fridge, and a reclining massage chair all were bought by my sister as well. He had to pay out of his pocket because that lady insisted they continue seizing whatever he bought until she saw the money. Although the final amount was halved, my mother, under the eyes of the law, shared half of that for some reason. It still cost him 70% of his saving. Of course, this wasn't about the money. We were just petty. We told the moving company they could do whatever they wanted with the furniture. Looking back, I should have taken the recliner because my back hurts like a even though I'm only in my late 20s. After that was done, I contacted my local factory to file a report. Remember the sweet pension he got with the condition that he behaved accordingly? Clearly, someone had been a bad boy. They let him go with it even though it was a small town. And everyone knew everything because nobody ever filed a report. But that's not the case anymore. I gave them a very detailed folder with pictures from his phone. To say they were was an understatement. They immediately set up a hearing and he was stripped of his rank, making his pension down to just over half of the original amount. I know this because old folks gossip like their lives depends on it, and my mother is not excluded. She was very happy hearing about that. It's all she talked about in a month. I was about to be done here, but a week later, my sister called to tell me that my aunt came to her door to berate her and her children. My sister was working from home. My mom also lived there but had gone out for some reason. My sister just called security to kick her out and warned me she could go for me next. I was seeing blood, not because of some lame Karen that could cause me inconveniences at most, but because she was screaming at my niece and nephew. As a gay man, I know full well the bloodline ends with me, so I put all of my love into those little guys, to the point that if I had been there, I would have bitten her head off. So I dug a little and found out my aunt was knees deep in debt. She was hoping she could leech some money off my father, if not from the money he made selling the house, then from his big bank account. Since neither of those was available anymore, she was very angry and thought she could lay it on my sister. You want to know what a man could do with determination and raging hatred? I never set up an online social presence, mainly because up to my 18th birthday, I was too poor to have a phone, and then the military taught me it wasn't needed. But for this special occasion, I made an exception. I created a Facebook account and befriended her. I didn't even have to pretend to be anyone, since old people apparently accept friend requests from anyone. She had this vibe where she'd show off her money and her vacations and her items, like a wealthy person. From my mother and her trusty gossip circle, I knew that she always told whoever she owed money that she was struggling, so I figured she must be blocking them. The next part was easy. I just had to send all of her selfies to everyone she's owing to. I didn't have to declare myself since I was literally on a throwaway account, so it's just this really long line of messages that showed my aunt spending her money lavishly. For the next following month, she was threatened, not with legal actions like I did, but with much more sinister actions. She would have thugs, not the police, throw gifted at her door, like paint, fish sauce, and sometimes literal shit. My mother also told me this, of course. She finally figured out what I was gonna do when I told her to find me a list of all the people she's owing to. The pro-revenge. As much as I want to take credit for this, the idea wasn't mine. Forgive me, for I once again had to lay out a bit of background. My father's side of the family is this very traditional family, where you would have a person acting as the head of the family deciding things that matter. This was way before the war, so obviously they don't do such things anymore. But the head of the family still has a certain voice, and there's this once-in-a-year ceremony where we gather together to pay tribute to our ancestors. During the ceremony, the head of the family will give a speech, and then some announcements like who died, who got married, who gave birth, etc., etc. Then there will be a celebratory party where we basically get shit-faced drunk. My great-grandfather was the head. He had 3 sons, and 2 of them died during the war. So my grandfather took the mantle, then my father, and eventually me. This whole side of the family is in another town that's like 3 hours away from our town, mainly because my grandfather didn't expect to be the head, so he moved out seeking opportunities. I found these gatherings redundant and unnecessary, but that year I was actually looking forward to it. My father tried to keep the actual date hidden. It wasn't fixed, but generally somewhere between June. But he seriously underestimated my mother. She doesn't have a gossip circle. She has an infinite number of them. So my mother, me, and my sister's family all head back for it. The trip was 14 hours in total, but the result was worth it. We timed it, so we would come 2 days earlier than my father, again thanks to her gossip circle. This side of the family had never heard the full story before, only the version my father gave them, which was that he and my mother left in good faith. I actually gave my father some credits for not bad-mouthing my mom. After weighing all the pros and cons, we decided to let my mother loose, and she's exceptional when it came to relaying details about her personal tragedies. I kid you not, if I had posted her story, word for word, by this time next week, there would be a global Justice for Thunderkurg's mother movement. It took just 1 day for everyone to know what an asshole my father had been. The look on his face when he arrived, with my aunt and my grandmother, and saw my family already, there was priceless. He got the stink eye from everyone for the rest of the day. Nobody would initiate conversations with him, so he's just sitting there like a sad dog. Now I know what they said about dead horses, but this idea was brilliant not to follow through. My uncle, let's call him Oliver, came up with this. In the hierarchy, he's equal to my father, and in the event that my branch doesn't have a male successor, 100% what's going to happen. His branch will be the head of the family. He told me I should take up the mantle of the head. It was very sudden. I didn't have a speech ready. My father was supposed to do that. But Oliver told me I could just tell whatever I want, because nobody really paid attention to that thing anyway. All the other elders were okay with it. The speech wasn't even the best thing. At the celebratory party, people will be assigned tables based on the family tree. Heads of each branch will sit together, their children sit together, the elders sit together, so on and so forth. Because I was elevated to the head of my branch, I would be sitting at the big boy table. My father didn't even get to sit at my supposed table, because miraculously, it was full, even though I could have sworn there weren't 20 of us, and each table can sit up to 10. He had to sit at the regular table with my aunt and a bunch of nasty widows who didn't hold back on their snarky comments, so I was told. I don't think he'll ever come back to one of those anytime soon. The aftermath. My father is now just a miserable old man. His mistress left him because, surprisingly, she was after his money. He's living in our old house with next to nothing. His retirement money, though halved, was good enough for him to live by. Last I heard, his cancer has come back, and obviously this time my sister won't be paying for it anymore. He had tried to initiate contact with my mother, trying to make amends. We had to block his number and his profile on my mother's account because she actually considered it. She has her soft sides. My aunt has to sell her house to pay for all the debt, or else they'd just continue harassing her. She now lives in a small house she bought off with the rest of her money. I felt bad for her husband because he's actually chill and quite nice, but he's not the most decisive and therefore doesn't really confront her. I hope he's doing better. I have no empathy for her only son, though. Let's just say the apple doesn't even fall from the tree. How do I know all of this? My mother's gossip circle. I left my grandmother out of this because she's very old. She's not demented in any way, she's perfectly sane, but she loved her son too much to admit he's in the wrong. Also, she was very nice and sweet to me growing up. A lot of my good memories are with her. I'm sad because she doesn't see my mother the same. I also stopped talking to her and would only visit once during Lunar New Year. She's lived in the small house she and my grandfather built, on the land that's now in my name. When she and my father are dead, I will carry out her wish to build an altar for her and my grandfather. Whether or not my father will be included is still up to debate. TLDR, father cheated on mother, so I took his house, his saving, his furniture, and his life circle. Just to clarify, all of this wouldn't have happened if he had acted in good faith. He could have called all of us back, announced that he'd be leaving my mother, and I wouldn't have given a damn. Instead, he was trying to scream and punch his way through it, so I acted in response. Also, I deleted that Facebook account. I'm crazy, but not that crazy. Edit. Fix the TLDR. Also, thanks kind strangers for the award. Also, about the small court claim, as I've mentioned, these kinds of claims are highly unethical in my country, so the law is also very slippery. You just have to prove that someone owns your money for something. It doesn't have to be big. I made it sound easy, but in reality, we had to go through 3 different hearings. The judge advised us to settle out of court the first 2 since my father wasn't present. The whole thing took almost a year before our claim was rewarded. My sister gave birth to my nephew around this time. In short, we found a loophole and utilized it. Also, yes, I'm Vietnamese. Infidelity is definitely a crime here. In fact, it's the first time I've heard it's not a crime somewhere else, so thank Reddit for this newfound knowledge. Also, clearly, this wasn't a spur of the moment. I have thought about it, like what we should do if things turned out messy, but nothing concrete because of my mother's disapproval. We didn't just wake up and decided to scorch the earth. The revenge was really brutal. When OP's father, who always mistreated his family and cheated on his wife, OP and his sister took heavy revenge on him. Seeing such a monster lose his house, pension, and on top of that, the mistress for which he messed up his family was really satisfying. The revenge was cool, but I feel sorry for OP's father because of the reappearance of cancer. Let's now move on to the next story from Lone Ranger. Stepdad cheats on my mom, so we get revenge. This may be a long one. Apologies in advance. I moved in with my mom after her marriage of 25 years with my dad was ended. He was a manipulative, but that's another story. Shortly after the divorce, my mom introduced me to her boyfriend at the time, Chris. Now my mom worked as a corrections officer at the county jail. The boyfriend was a former inmate in for a DUI. That should have been the first red flag, but my mom was grieving a long marriage, and I didn't want to push the subject. Chris seemed to make her happy, and that was enough for me. Me, bro, and sis all moved in with Mum and Chris, and we seemed to get along okay. Chris and I bonded a bit over our love of video games, and all seemed well. That is, until 2017. Due to Chris's prior DUI, he had to go in regularly for probationary checkups at the courthouse. One day, he didn't return, and we got a little worried. We then received a phone call from him, from Texas. Turns out, when he arrived at the courthouse that day, he was jumped by the FBI. His family from Texas was implicated in a number of gang and drug-related crimes, and due to a situation where he was in a vehicle during a drug handoff, he was on the hook as well. He ended up agreeing to testify against his family members in exchange for a shorter sentence and being allowed to be out of prison before the trial. My mom was distraught, and over the course of many phone calls over a year, they worked out their marriage plans when he returned. His store owner at the DQ he worked at allowed him to come back as well, back to his store manager position. Soon after, the drinking started. Now, obviously, because of his DUI, Chris was clearly no stranger to drinking. He began to drink more and more, to the point where he was consuming half a 24-pack of beer a day. Chris was a mean drunk. He regularly started fights when wasted, and while they never got physical, he wasn't exactly kind with his words. My mom enabled his behavior for several years, saying the stress was getting to him from work and from the upcoming trial. Finally, after several years, my mom had enough. Chris came home extremely drunk one night, and my mom confronted him. She asked if he'd been drinking, And when he didn't deny it, she kicked him out. He went to live with a friend temporarily. The next morning, Mom asked us to help gather a few of his essentials so that he didn't have to re-enter the home until he was sober. While we were gathering his things, we heard a knock at the front door. We opened it to find Betty, one of Chris's co-workers, and someone I went to high school with. She told my mom she had something important to share. After sitting my mom down and telling her not to share where she got the info from, Betty told my mom about how Chris was cheating on my mom with Darla, how he regularly had Darla perform sexual acts in and around his workplace, how Betty had caught them, and how Chris told her that if she ever told my mom, he'd fire her. He was the store manager. And finally, how Darla was pregnant. My mom was angry. After the initial shock wore off, she told us to round up all of Chris's things and to dump them outside. We took everything of his out of the house and tossed it all in the alley behind our house. Chris had no reason or ability to return to the house. It was rented, with only my mom on the paperwork, so no issues there. In the meantime, she called and confronted him. He confessed to the entire affair, and that he was happy Darla was pregnant, because that meant he'd finally have a child of his own. Mom refused to have more kids. We three were massive strains on her body. She likely wouldn't survive anymore. He refused to apologize for any of his actions. My mom arranged for him to collect his items from the alley, with an officer present, and he left our lives. The revenge. Now my mom clearly wanted to dust her hands of him and move on. She was already quite emotional from the whole ordeal and wanted nothing more from him. But sis bro and I had other ideas. First, we called his workplace. DQ operates as an independently owned franchise, and the owner of this branch owned several branches in the area. He was also a good friend. We informed him of the acts being performed on the premises, and he went through the process of getting Chris booted from his position and barred him from any of the branches in the area. Funnily, Betty got his position after he left and now runs a tight and clean ship. Chris no longer had a job or a place to live, and so went to live with Darla in a town about an hour away. We found out that he started working at another DQ in that town and informed the owner of that location of the situation. It took significantly longer due to there being no current indecent actions occurring there, but eventually he lost that job too. Soon after, Chris began driving around our neighborhood, seemingly stalking my mom and our family, probably because of his job loss. Now, due to the whole situation in Texas, he never had his probation lifted for his DUI, and thus still did not have a license. He never had to drive when he lived with us, since work was local and we could drive him as needed. But here he was, clearly driving around by himself when he shouldn't be. We contacted the police and informed them about Darla's vehicle in our neighborhood, and that we believed Chris was driving it without a license. We told them to pull over the vehicle next time they see it, as it would likely be driving again. Sure enough, a few weeks later, we were told that Chris indeed was pulled over and sent back to the local jail for driving without a license and while intoxicated. The police also did a search of the home he was staying at and found several guns at the premises. Since he was a felon, he was not legally allowed to have weaponry on the premises, meaning there was more jail time tacked on. By the time his jail time had finished, it was just in time for him to be sent back to incarceration in Texas for the trial. Chris's son was born while Chris was in prison. Darla evidently realized what an absolute ass Chris was and cut ties with him while he was in prison. During his prison time, Chris started sending tones of letters to my mom, stating how sorry he was, pleading to take him back, and ranting about how it wasn't his fault. All in the same letter, mind you. Mom burned every one of them. We moved on, moving out of state. Chris evidently got out of prison some years ago and now lives in Kansas, struggling and fighting child support, which Darla sued him for. Mom now has a new boyfriend who treats her right and cares a lot more than Chris ever did. Bro and sis moved on and out, and I still live with Mom, assisting her with the newly purchased home that we've been renovating. Life is looking okay. I was reminded of this by a chat with a coworker about cheaters and thought to post it here for others to enjoy. The revenge was destructive. OP's stepdad got what he deserved. It was not only revenge for cheating on OP's mom, but also the result of many of his illegal activities, such as drug selling, stalking OP's family, handling firearms without a license, and driving without a license. OP just effed off his stepdad's already messed up life. Welcome to r/pro revenge story from Sister in My Wedding, where OP's entitled sister demands to walk down the aisle before OP at her wedding. It infuriates OP, but OP's fiancé suggests to seek revenge, and finally she inflicts a brutal revenge on her sister. Sister wants to walk down the aisle at my wedding. We use that to our advantage. Here I am, writing this long tale in my honeymoon, but it does feel cathartic to finally type it out, and my husband is more excited about this than the resort drinks. LOL. Anyway, this is a throwaway because I don't have a Reddit account, and my husband, the Reddit fanatic, said he doesn't want this associated with his main. As to why the Reddit guy isn't the one writing this, it's because he said, since it's my family, I should be the one with the honor of posting the story. But he is looking over my shoulder to help out. So, I think first it's necessary to give some background, to explain how this behavior reached this level, and why our responses were as they were. It's a long read, I apologize. So, ever since I could remember, my parents loved my sister more. I don't mean in subtle ways either. If my sister accused me of something, they'd believe it and punish me. If I accused her, they wouldn't believe. Even if there was undeniable proof, they'd still give her a lesser punishment and try to find a way to scold me in tandem. My birthday cake had to be a flavor she wanted. Hers did not, and my parents always denied knowing I didn't like that type of cake. They always bought her a bit more than for me. We went to where she wanted, even if it was an event that should be about me. My sister grew up spoiled and didn't like me, just used me as a punching bag. But at first, she mostly ignored me. But then it got really bad when we were young teens. I'm not sure what the cause and effect are, but she found herself with no friends, and her behavior got worse. Did her friends move? Did they ditch her because she was mean? I don't know, because we were never close, and my parents loved to boast about her achievements, but never ever mentioned any issues. Whereas with me, they loved to bring out any flaws of mine constantly as teasing material. I only knew she had none because we went to the same school, and I noticed her no longer walking around with people. Anyway, she had no friends. I did. I used to be decently popular. My sister realized that, and suddenly I stopped being the occasional punching bag to a hated person she needed to take down at all times. She started accusing me of more stuff. She accused my friends of more stuff. My parents stopped allowing me to hang out with anyone, the excuses ranging from, they're not good people according to your sister, to, why are you trying to leave us? Why can't you be like your sister and enjoy family time? What saved me from complete isolation was extended family. Most of my family lived in the same hometown, and I got along with my cousins despite some age difference. At one gathering, they invited me over to something, I don't remember what, and I sadly replied, I'm not allowed to go anywhere. When asked why, my kid self with no filter replied that it was because I wasn't allowed to have friends since my sister didn't have any. Well, that reached the adults, who apparently tore my parents apart. Later, I was scolded for lying and grounded, as if I had anywhere to go, for a month. But after that, they allowed me some leeway, so it was worth it. And my sister changed schools. I guess the humiliation of extended family, knowing her social status was bad, and she demanded to be changed. And my parents immediately obliged, even though it cost them more since the school was further away. But she made friends on the new school. However, she never went back to the previous status quo of mostly ignoring me. I guess having felt the power of how badly she could screw with me, and anger that I told family she had no friends, she never let me go. My life was still bad. Her friends would come over and bully me, and my parents called it light teasing. I never called friends over because my parents were awful hosts to them, or my sister would accuse them of taking stuff and they'd believe it. I did become close to my cousins though, since my parents never dared do any of that to family. And then I got my first boyfriend. I didn't want to bring him home at all, but my parents insisted. Well, at one point we were separated, and he came to find me to tell me my sister was flirting with him, by which he meant she came over with skimpy clothing, batting her eyelashes really badly, and started telling him how bad I was and how good she was. He was irked and ran off to find me. Of course, my sister told my parents a different tale, that my BF had instead tried to flirt with her, but she naturally refused since how could she do that to me? Guess who my parents believed? Now, my BF wasn't perfect, but I immediately believed him. For a mean reason. But remember that back then I was a teen, and suffering from the unfair bad treatment. I was very resentful and moody, and now hated my sister as much as she hated me. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about looks. I hadn't mentioned them yet because they weren't relevant. My parents are overweight. And since they liked showing love via food, giving you more food, buying treats, etc., my sister is also overweight, whereas I was not. In fact, I've always been kind of skinny because punishment often included no treats or snacks. Obviously, weight isn't what matters, personality is. But my sister even then was already rude and spoiled. Even her flirting attempts were bad because she never learned to work for anything since she could demand, and my parents would deliver. Added to that the fact that she didn't look like some model. Even my self-conscious teen self didn't believe my BF would try and cheat on me with her. Anyway, my parents prohibited me from dating such a horrible boy. I did try to keep going in secret, but it was hard, and the relationship ended. I did get another, but again my sister accused him of flirting with her when he refused her advances. Again my parents believed her. I tried pointing out how this happened again, but they decided that meant I was incapable of making good choices and kept picking bad boyfriends. The relationship couldn't handle the Romeo-Juliet situation and fizzled out again. I would eventually get called a slut in high school, as I was fine with making out with boys and such, but refused to have relationships. Thankfully, it never got back to my sister or parents. My sister did bring one boyfriend home during all this time. He was paraded with pride, and my parents spent every second telling me how good he was, and why couldn't I be like my sister and find myself someone like that, until he stopped showing up, and suddenly he was conniving bastard that tricked my sister. Oh well. And the unequal treatment continued at this time. She had more spending money. Her curfews were much better than mine. She was free to go anywhere at any time while I couldn't. If I pointed it out, my parents would say it's because she's older. But when I reached that age, I still didn't have the same treatment she had. And when pointed out, they'd deny they ever said that or claim it was because I couldn't be trusted like she was, using my sister's accusations against my BF and friends as proof of my bad judgment. Time goes by, and it is time for my sister to graduate. She was accepted into a college, not a very well-regarded one, and she had no scholarship or anything. Again, because only her achievements were told to me, I don't know which colleges she even tried for, so I can't say how badly she was rejected. I do know her grades were bad in school though, because whenever she got a B, we would celebrate. I would usually get good grades, but my parents refused to celebrate, claiming since I always got those, what was there to celebrate? My parents, naturally, made a lot of fanfare and told her they'd pay for everything. I was relieved she'd be going away. Not that it made my life any easier. She'd always come home every other weekend, and somehow stuff kept missing from her room, or some other issues she'd think of to make my life miserable. My curfews were still strict, etc. Eventually, my mom came to talk to me about my impending graduation. I'm only a year younger than my sister. She told me since they were paying for my sister's college, they had no money to pay for mine. So it would be better for me to start working immediately after graduation and waiting until my sister finished uni to see if they could afford something for me. Oh, and if I decided to stay at home, I'd have to pay for all my stuff, part of the bills and rent. I pointed out I could get student loans. Mom said yes, except no. That is, because they were so caring towards me and I had such bad judgment, they would decide if a college was worth my getting in debt or not. I'm not sure how they'd stop me from getting loans, but I didn't ask. Scholarships weren't mentioned. They had no idea what my grades were anymore, and never believed in my capabilities. Anyway, I didn't bat an eyelid. I simply said okay. My mom clearly didn't expect that, and kept pushing. Maybe she hoped I'd throw a tantrum so they'd have an excuse to not ever pay for my college. But I said nothing except I understood their position, thanked them for caring, and that was that. My dad later tried the same, but I also refused to be emotional. You see, after a whole lifetime of their terrible parenting, I never had any expectations towards my education. I knew they would find an excuse to not pay for mine and make my life miserable. I never believed they would eventually pay it if I worked and waited for my sister to graduate. I had been preparing for college for a long time. I could barely go out. My friendships were slim, so I had a lot of time to study. And study I did because I saw college as my only chance to be free. Well, the time came and I worked my ass off and got a scholarship. Not to anywhere like Ivy League or anything like law or medical school, but it was a good enough course in a decent college with a full scholarship. Knowing my sister would hate it and try to stop me via parents, I put my achievement in social media at the same time I told them. Even forced myself to thank them in the post. Now they couldn't forbid me from going, as they'd have to explain to family why not. Initially, they were even a little proud and boasting about it. And then I guess my sister got to them, and they changed gears and even asked me if I was sure I wanted to go. They let slip my sister wasn't doing well in college, and since she was smarter and had better judgment than me, I'd suffer worse. I obviously stuck to my guns. They weren't happy but couldn't do anything. College was my savior. I started being happy. I still contacted my parents and visited on holidays and such, but since they refused to pay for anything, I could excuse not going a lot due to money. During this time, I avoided introducing any man to them. And my sister stopped going to college. I know she didn't graduate because, again, they'd have made a fanfare about it. Moved back home, paying no bills or rent, but it's different, my parents said, and started working at the same company as my mom, obviously thanks to my mom pulling strings. This was all sold to me as a source of pride. Oh well, almost there, I promise. I met my husband around this time. You know those people that say that if I was in X situation, I'd have done something? My husband is the type that really does. I'm the person that is meek and a doormat in any situation, and then can't sleep at night wishing I had done something, had thought of something witty to say, etc. I'm the person that can't help but cry when I'm angry. My husband is the guy that claps back immediately. He loves drama, in that he loves to resolve it. He's the guy that if he doesn't immediately reply to a slight, "You better start worrying," because he won't forgive and forget, he's just stewing something worse for revenge. He's the one that wanted me to post here, and wanted to post on a nuclear revenge board too, but decided what we did wasn't nuclear. People were baffled I got together with him, but just because I was incapable, thanks to my upbringing probably, of acting like him, it didn't mean I didn't like it. I love that my husband does what I can't, and he treats people well as long as they do the same to him. When we discussed marriage, we decided we didn't care much about the ceremony due to our budget, as we'd rather spend on a dream trip to Europe for our honeymoon. As for where to do it, since his family was spread out, and mine was still mostly concentrated in my hometown, we decided to do it there. We weren't living too far off either, so we could take some long trips during the weekends to manage stuff. Plus there was some work flexibility, so we could stay in my hometown for a bit too if needed. We sent out the engagement announcement and the save the date for a few months later. Well, at this point my parents naturally demanded they meet my man. I wanted to grow a spine and refuse, but was having a hard time. The distance had made me think maybe my parents weren't so bad. Well, my husband looked like I cancelled Christmas when I told him I would at least ensure they were never alone with him. See, he had been getting ready for this. He even bought a high-quality recorder he could hide in a pocket to record it all. He was stoked, thinking of all the ways he could refuse my sister's advances, insult her, and then spread the recording of her attempts to my family. So, off he went alone and excited to meet them, and came back later euphoric. Babe, you won't believe the awful they wanted. Babe, we can f them over so bad there's so many possibilities. I was confused and wanted to hear the recording, but he smartly told me it was better to listen to him first, or else I'd misunderstand him. Well, he went there, and instead of the flirting, my parents and my sister sat him down. After some grumbling about not being okay with him, my judgment, etc., they proclaimed they were willing to pay for my wedding, on one condition. My sister would walk down the aisle on my wedding first, in a wedding dress. Their excuses were that it wasn't okay for a younger sister to marry first, so it was only fair if my sister had at least the experience of it. On my venue, with pictures being taken, and the dress, and she'd have a cake later too, etc. My husband will now type his part. Hey, vengeful husband here, hell hath no fury like a pro-revenge, instant karma, nuclear revenge lurker when his beloved is scorned. That said, as much as my wife, she's my wife now, paints me as this quick-witted dude, I admit my neurons all but short-circuited when those folks legit suggested that like some sort of great gift. Even Troy would rather take in the horse a second time, methinks. Alas, after my brain rebooted, I did have a whole catalogue of insults about to spew out, but something in my soul whispered in my ear like the devil, string these f***s along. So I said I needed to think, see how my wife, back then fiancé, would react, and then ran out of there before I could give away my nefarious plans. Back to me, the wife. So my husband sincerely recounted how my parents wanted even my wedding to be about my sister, with a grin on his face, and had the recording to prove it. I was shocked. The distance had softened how bad they treated me, and I thought even they wouldn't go so far. Thankfully, my husband insisting on the angle of revenge helped me not go to a bad headspace. We had a blast thinking up ways to screw them over this. From ridiculously outlandish to what we thought was feasible. We then called his much more level-headed brother when we decided on a plan. It involved having 2 venue addresses, giving them the wrong one, etc. Well, level-headed brother scolded us for it. While he acknowledged he would never be able to convince us from retaliation, he at least showed us something like that would be hard to pull off. Some of our other ideas were also at danger of getting sued, so we eventually settled for the most benign plan. Act like we agreed, but then hire security and don't let her in. Obviously, if that was all, it wouldn't be pro-revenge. The rest is all mostly my husband. By he wants me to do the honors, so here goes. Just important to mention, everything he did was previously discussed with me, and were our mutual ideas. He went back to my parents, said he probed and thought I wouldn't be down with it. However, he didn't see the issue and, not wanting family to fall apart, would be down to helping them do it. He pointed out I don't like conflict, so if I was surprised with it, I might not throw a tantrum in front of all the people. On the other hand, marriage is a big thing, so who knew if I'd lash out? Thus, he suggested a compromise. They'd help pay for stuff. This way, I would feel even more pressure to not say anything, as not only would we be public, well, with our families there, but I'd be grateful to the help they gave, and that'd mollify me. He said my parents looked surprised by my grown sister starting skipping with joy. Literally so, like a kid. So, it was accepted. Important. My husband also claimed that due to some bad judgment in boyfriends in the past, these words were all my idea, and I'm so proud of using their words against then LOL. I was distrustful and controlling and liked to check his phone and stuff to ensure he wasn't cheating on me. As such, it was imperative that nothing of this plan was ever put in any writing. For any discussion pertaining to my sister walking down the aisle before me, he'd go over to their house to talk. And so began the months of deception, where my parents and sister thought they were tricking me, and my husband and I were milking them. How? Well, rather than pay for the wedding than lay low, of course my parents wanted input in everything. Some stuff that meant a lot to me, the songs and color palette. My husband would convince them to let it go to keep me in line. But since we never really cared for the ceremony to begin with, everything else was game, or so they thought. What we did was thus. We'd go, say, to check the drink and menu options. We'd then accept the lowest or second lowest priced option. My husband would then secretly take my sister there to also try it out, then sigh and say, "It's a pity we don't want to abuse my parents' goodwill, so we wouldn't get the best options." Cue my sister demanding my parents pay for the best. My parents would then tell me not to worry, and they'd pay for the most expensive. Same was done with photographer. Flowers. My husband handed my sister a bouquet of the flowers we wanted, then sadly expressed how I wanted some other, tasteless flowers. Cue my parents telling me they wanted us to go with said flowers and they'd pay for it. Wedding dress. We hit a minor snag here. My parents wanted me to use a hideous dress. Okay, not outright hideous, but it wasn't my style and wouldn't look that good on me. We had planned on saying yes then, simply not using it. But my mum sent me a message about it, so there'd be proof. I said okay. We had to go with me refusing in text and standing my ground. My husband went over there and said he'd see what he could do. My sister suggested ruining my desired dress, so I'd be forced to wear the other one. He pretended to agree. During all this time, they really kept communications outside any text. We made sure that had happened by, when my sister tried messaging my husband, have me reply to here. This solidified the "I'm controlling" and neurotic claims my husband was making, so they believed it and never risked anything in writing. And maybe some people might not like the thought of their partner going around and talking badly about them to family. But I'm such a doormat that the thought of being painting as this controlling and dangerous bitch is extremely funny to me, and I egged him on to do it. I guess I have a warped sense of humor, lol. Oh, and my sister did try to flirt with him, but he acted conflicted. Also, to really sell that he was with them, my husband would pretend to tell them things without my knowledge, but he never told them we hired security. It was really funny. My husband and I, who had sincerely considered a courthouse wedding to focus cost on our honeymoon, having this extravagant, expensive wedding, and barely spending a dime. We called it back pay for emotional damages from my parents, lol. I think my husband, okay, he just confirmed I'm right, lol, was enjoying the whole tricking them more than planning our wedding, lol. I didn't think it was possible to witness a guy beaming at the thought of wasting his whole Saturday doing a car trip to discuss wedding details with his in-laws, but here we are. Soon the day came. The plan my parents/sister/husband had come up with was, wait until everyone was seated. Since the bride always comes out late, they'd have my sister arrive at that precise time to avoid me seeing her and trying to stop it, and walk down the aisle. By the time I heard what happened, it'd be too late to do anything. As for my dress, we saved some of the leftover fabric from my dress alterations, and my husband took that to my parents' place. Sister still lives with them even now, and showed them as proof he'd ruined the dress. Then said he had to go back to me as I was raging, and he needed to calm me down. He'd see them at the wedding. We made sure to keep our actual security hidden at first. As the guests and my parents arrived, all they could see was a woman with a list of names to check. Only after my parents arrived and sat down did we bring out security, a guy that looked like a bodyguard. We told him to not allow anyone my sister in, and even agreed on paying a handsome tip if he didn't reveal we told him that. Soon the time arrived. My parents got a text my sister was less than 5 minutes away, so my dad went and told people to start. My bridesmaids had been told to follow his lead beforehand, so they obeyed without checking with me. After they all went down and took their places, my dad stood up at the entrance, as if waiting for me. During this, a friend not in the wedding party texted me to get ready. This because if my husband or bridesmaids, etc., took out a phone and started texting, people might notice. This friend was in on the plan. She's my husband's friend, as willing to help stir drama as he is, and didn't care about being a bridesmaid or anything. Well, as soon as my dad took his position, the bridal song started playing, the doors open, and I come in. My dad looked aghast at me being there. He tried glancing behind me, but you can't see the venue entrance from where we were, so he couldn't see what happened to my sister. And then his phone rang. I saw the caller ID, and it was her. He just left me there with a mumbled, something came up. There were gasps and confusion all around. The friend in on it loudly asked what happened. I lied, and in a teary voice said he told me it wasn't supposed to be me there. It's not what he said, but my husband and I agreed that if he dared leave me, I should say that to make him look the worst possible. As for the tears, I wish I could say it was just my stellar acting. But no. Despite everything, a part of me didn't think he'd go as far as abandon me there. That the sister thing wasn't true, but an elaborate joke. I don't know. I was hurt, still am, so I was sincerely trying not to cry. The friend then loudly went, "What did he mean by it shouldn't be you?" So that as many people as possible could hear and spread it, then went, "I will go and check," and ran off. We decided to do this to make her create hell with the security and stop my dad from coming back and stopping the ceremony or something. At some point, my mom also left. At this point, my husband's dad quickly ran over and took my arm. He'd been forewarned he might need to. Watching him run desperately to me helped me smile. I walked down the aisle to whispers as people discussed what happened. Some apparently left to check too. When I reached my husband, though, all was well. He made me feel better joking. My sad face was so real I deserved an Oscar. And don't worry, he'd rake them over the coals for what they did, lol. We got married without a hitch. My parents didn't come back. I did notice a lot of people leaving then coming back during the party, but no one dared tell me what was happening. Someone did come and whisper in my husband's ear, and he went out. He came back after a while with a thunderous expression, but whispered in my ear he needed to go hide somewhere before he broke character and started smiling lol. Well, what happened is, it worked. The following is the summed account from friends, family, the security guy, and my husband that I received afterwards. My sister did arrive in a wedding dress. The security refused to let her in. Per our agreement, he claimed she must be in the wrong venue because there was already a bride. And yes, we tipped him really well as promised. My dad went there and tried threatening him with police, claiming he never heard of him, so he couldn't be working there. The security agreed to the police, since he was hired by us and doing his job. My dad realized by then it'd be too late and tried to demand he let my sister in. At this point, the friend came over, started shouting and insulting my sister, and asking what was going on, basically stalling. My mom soon came and eventually other people. At this point, the wedding plan was bust. All my parents could do now is damage control, as everyone that learned about it was aghast they'd try and pull it and screaming and berating them. The three naturally said it wasn't a secret, and threw my husband under the bus. At this point, my husband was summoned. When he came over, he put on his best look of confusion and denied. To quote him, gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss lol. He denied having ever agreed to something so ridiculous. When they insisted he did, he demanded proof, and of course, they couldn't produce any. All text exchanges they could produce were about normal wedding decisions. My sister was scream-crying, and apparently sat on the floor kicking her legs like a kid. My dad looked like he'd beat my husband, but security and other people held him back. Of course, they said they had no proof because my husband told them not to text. My husband laughed and said, "Wow, how convenient, huh?" Then again repeated, why would he ever agree to something so up? Tore them a new one about being awful parents, then said he wasn't going to let their stupid plans and lying get in the way of his wedding, and went back to me. No one believed them. The venue had cameras, but they refused to show me the recording, as that was only for security purposes. But some people filmed parts of it. Watching my parents and sister get ripped apart by any and every one that came out to check the drama was delicious. After years and years of being accused of stuff and not believed, to watch them have a taste was one of the best wedding gifts. My mother was crying, my dad kept changing from purple to white, my sister was still on the floor crying and screaming. They kept insisting on that my husband was in on it, but people kept asking why would my husband agree? Why was there no proof? Why did they want my sister to do this to my wedding? And they had no good answer to any of it. Eventually they were told to leave and had no choice but to do so. My dad apparently had to drag my sister up as she refused to leave the ground. Again, people said nothing to me all night. I guess they wanted to spare me. And maybe it's because I was the bride, and not just a guest for once. But it did feel like everyone was making extra effort to be nice, positive, and excited about everything. My husband says, all the expensive shit they were eating drinking certainly helps, LOL. We had a blast. My husband maintained the forced angry face for only a short while before breaking out in smiles again. After that, we went to the hotel to catch some sleep before going to our honeymoon. Speaking of which, my parents did try to pay for our plane tickets, but we thought that was risky, as they could try and cancel them or something, so we refused. Of course, since that whole thing the three have tried to contact me, I've refused calls, because my husband insisted on keeping a paper trail. I smart thing because my sister did eventually message me. I won't repeat it as it was very unhinged and didn't make much sense, but the important part was that she blamed me for her humiliation, called my husband a two-faced snake that fooled them for months. He wants to print and put that on our wall, LOL, and hoped, but was also certain it'd happen, that I'd get cheated on by him. She did also suggest he was cheating on me with her, actually. My husband took my phone, screenshot the call logs, screenshot my sister's message, screenshot some messages of my parents, demanding I pick up the phone, and sent it all to my family group chat, and sent screenshots of messages to him where they called him names and threatened him. But he kept up the, "You're delusional, I never agreed to anything" shtick, and even threatened to sue them for defamation and harassment. He wrote a message in said group chat begging my family for help, as I was now being harassed by them constantly. He begged family to help stop them from trying to ruin my honeymoon now that they had failed to ruin my wedding. Then finished neatly with a request that they don't share our locations to avoid my parents sending my sister over, and then claiming he had somehow agreed to pretend to f her in our honeymoon suite. LOL. My family assured him they'd take care of it. And indeed, since then we've had silence. My husband is a little disappointed my sister didn't disobey, so he could tattle again while tearing her a new We'll see if it'll last. All in all, while I obviously would have preferred to have a normal, loving family at my wedding, at least for once in my life, they not only failed to ruin something meaningful to me, but I got them back. Extra info. Do I know why they treat me like this? I've been asked this question a lot, so I assume you all will think the same. I have wondered this all my life, and I still don't know. I tried asking when I was young, but they denied any difference and scolded me for acting spoiled, so I quit trying. I've thought of some many possibilities, but based on my observations, I think it's this. I was unplanned. They took a while to have my sister, so she was not only wanted, but also like a miracle child after so long. However, given our age difference is quite small, I think they didn't expect to have a kid so soon or easily, and didn't use adequate protection way too soon after my sister's birth, and maybe didn't notice my mom was pregnant until too late. So they were saddled with an unplanned baby while still dealing with a newborn, and they're not that well off, so having the extra expense likely didn't help. So they resented me, but that's my conjecture. Regardless, I've accepted the answer won't truly matter. What they did to me was unwarranted no matter what. Did they really think this would work? My husband and I talked, and we have the theory that they never wanted to do this at all. We think my sister threw a tantrum over me getting married first, when she barely gets dates, and they gave my husband that outlandish proposition, as in, they didn't want to pay for my wedding, and didn't think we'd accept, or that it'd even look good for them to do it. But by suggesting it, and being refused, they could look like the good guys to my sister, while having an excuse to not give me a dime. But then my husband accepted it, and they couldn't backtrack, or else risk my sister turning on them. Summary. Because it did get too long, bad parents want to have my sister walk down the aisle at my wedding first, in wedding dress and all. My husband pretends to go along with it, and uses this as an excuse to get my parents to pay for the most expensive stuff possible for my wedding, which they only did because they thought it would be for my sister's sake. When the day comes, though, we hired security that didn't let her in. When family called out my parents, they said my husband was in on it, but my husband denied it. There was no evidence, so no one believed them. So now family is against them. No one believes them. My sister didn't ruin my wedding, and we got a lot of money out of them. Wow, the revenge was really brutal and humiliating, and was well deserved. OP's parents' preference of one daughter over another is understandable, though not justifiable. But demanding that OP let her sister walk down the aisle before her at her wedding is unimaginable, and it is the height of selfishness and entitlement. What OP and her fiancé did to OP's sister is 100% justified. The revenge was brutal and deeply satisfying. Welcome to Am I the AH story from Twixeyes My Crack. Here someone steals OP's lunch daily, and OP accuses a co-worker of stealing his lunch, leading to a confrontation in the office. AITA for hiding my lunch at work and reporting a co-worker for stealing it? For the past 2 months, I have been cooking meals at home and taking my lunch to work. I work in an office where we all have our own cubicles, and the layout is large enough to be considered an office. In the past 2 weeks, someone kept stealing my lunch, even though I had my name and extension on it, and went as far as to wash out the containers and leave a thank you note. I wrote an office email, because I didn't know who it was, asking them not to steal my lunch, but it did not work. So I saw a couple of my colleagues coming in with a large lunch pail and leaving it in their cubicle. When I asked one of them, she said that's how you get to keep your lunch because the lunch pirates will steal your food otherwise. So I did the same thing. I bought a large lunch pail and like 6 of those blue ice packs that keep food cold, and now keep my food in my cubicle on a 3M hanger under my office sweater. An hour ago, I went to lunch, heated up my food, and sat down to eat. This co-worker, we don't work in the same department, so I don't really know her, asked me if I came in late. I said no, why? She said because my lunch was not in the fridge. I said it's because I keep it in my cubicle now because I'm tired of people stealing my food. The microwave pings, and I get my food out and proceed to eat. She put a styrofoam plate next to me, and I'm looking at her. She says, "Well, you can split your lunch with me because I don't have any." I looked her dead in the face and asked her if she was the one stealing my lunch. She said she didn't steal, she borrowed. I said, "Borrowed? So when are you going to pay me back? I'm not welfare. You didn't bring your lunch. We are literally in the middle of downtown. You can literally throw a pebble and hit an eatery. I work just like you. And if you didn't bring your food, you better go buy some because I am not sharing, period. I closed my food containers and was making my way back to my cubicle to report her to HR. She called me selfish. I told her she was an entitled thief, and I would be letting everyone know. So I reported her to HR, my manager, and her manager. I got 2 emails from people I don't know saying I should not have reported her because I don't know her situation. I emailed them back and told them they, nor she, know my situation, which is pretty good, but that's not the point. And anyone who is wearing Tom Ford pumps should literally not be stealing anyone's food. So, AITA for reporting her and not wanting to share, and AITA for keeping my food in my cubicle. It seems that OP is not an AH because there are clear indications that OP's colleague has been stealing his food. If she wasn't, how would she know that his food was not in the fridge? So, OP did the right by reporting to the HR. So, I would give OP 0 out of 5 scores on the AH scale. As for OP's colleague financial situation, if she had any problem, she could have asked OP or others' colleague for help, but stealing cannot be justified. So, she is an AH, and I would rate her 2.5 on the AH scale. Let's now jump on the next story from Tim's third account, where OP wants to break up with his girlfriend because she turned off her location, got injured, and didn't tell OP when they had decided to go on a date. AITA for wanting to break up with my girlfriend after she turned off her location, got injured, and didn't tell me? I, 25M, didn't hear anything from my girlfriend, 22F, all day yesterday, even though we had planned for her to come over in the evening. When she didn't show up, I started to worry. We share our Find My location for safety, especially since she often takes public transport alone late at night. I noticed her location was turned off, which was unusual and only added to my concern. As I hadn't heard from her, I reached out to mutual friends to see if they had seen her. One friend mentioned they'd seen her at her hobby activity in the evening, where she was with her mother and some guy. The friend didn't mention anything unusual, certainly not an injury, so I assumed she was fine. However, I was still puzzled as to why she hadn't contacted me or shown up. I tried calling her parents, who were annoyed I'd woken them up and didn't give me any useful information except for she's asleep here at home, now good night. This morning, after a sleepless night, her mother finally got back to me and told me my girlfriend had injured her leg at work, possibly a broken leg, and that she was on strong medication, which is why she was asleep. Apparently, a coworker had taken her to the ER right after the accident. But none of this is making sense to me. If she'd injured her leg so badly, I don't understand how she was able to go to her hobby as my friend saw yesterday. Plus, it was this same coworker she mentioned before, the one who'd picked her up from my place for work without me knowing. That was already strange because I've always told her she can ask me for a ride, and I'm flexible in the mornings. This happened like 4 days ago. The coworker pickup, not the whole thing which happened yesterday. With her location still turned off and no communication from her, I feel like I'm the last to know anything. I'm seriously considering breaking up with her over this, as soon as she reaches out to me. If I were in an accident, my first request would be to let her know, and I'd hope for the same in return. AITA for feeling hurt by her lack of communication, and the fact that she prioritized telling everyone but me. Edit. She still has our pictures on her socials, our anniversary on her WhatsApp status. That's a common thing to do. OP is not an AH for feeling hurt because of the lack of communication from her girlfriend. This is really weird behavior, but there is some hint of ghosting as well, given the fact that she has her location turned off and was seen by her colleague at her hobby activity. If she was seriously injured, how could she be engaging in her hobby activity with her family? Things are very unclear and unusual, but breaking up without any communication would be an impulsive decision. As for scores, I would rate OP 0 out of 5 and OP's girlfriend 0.5 for not having proper communication with her boyfriend. Let's now move on to the next story from True-Strawberry-9409. AITA for refusing to cancel my vacation after my brother demanded I pay for his emergency surgery instead. So here's the situation. I, 30F, have been planning a 2-week vacation to Europe with my partner for the past year. We've both saved up a lot of money for this trip, and it's a big deal for us because we've never been on a major vacation together before. The flights, hotels, everything has already been paid for. Last week, my brother, 35M, called me in a panic saying he needs emergency surgery for a dental issue. It's not life-threatening, but his tooth infection is bad, and it needs to be dealt with soon. He doesn't have insurance, long story involving bad financial decisions, and the procedure is going to cost about 10K USD. He asked me to loan him the money, but there's no way I have an extra 10K USD lying around after paying for this vacation. When I told him that, he got mad and said I should cancel my trip to help him, since family comes first. He even suggested I ask for refunds on the flights and hotels, as though that would magically solve the problem. I told him I felt bad for his situation, but I wasn't going to cancel a trip we'd been planning for a year over his poor financial choices, especially when this isn't a life or death situation. He lost it, called me selfish, accused me of abandoning him in his time of need, and got our mom involved. Now my mom is pressuring me to cancel and help him out, saying it's just a vacation, and I can always reschedule. But I don't think it's fair that I should be expected to sacrifice something I've worked hard for, because my brother can't handle his own responsibilities. AITA? Is he lying about the cost to drain me off my money or something? OP is not an AH for refusing to cancel her vacation and give money to her brother, because she is not responsible for her brother's bad decisions in the past, and now for his surgery. Another point is that this is not a very serious surgery. If it were a serious one, he could ask OP for help, but here it seems that OP's brother just wanted to exhaust her and drain her of her money. In other words, he is being an AH, and I would give him 2 out of 5 scores on the AH scale, and OP deserves a 0. Let's now jump on the next story from yesterday, 3710. AITA for ending my engagement because of his demands about our prenup. I, 37F, recently received a lump sum for a career project that turned into a whole company. I entered into an agreement with a company that has been reselling my services throughout licensing and long-term corporate JVs. When I signed the paperwork, I believed I had the opportunity to build a financial future without it affecting my relationship. However, this has not been the case, and I'm very put off, to the point of breaking off our engagement. We've been together for 4 years. I met him on the last leg of my struggle to achieve what has become my life's work motivation. This project has been all-consuming, and aside from that, I only had time for my family. I have very good friends, but everyone is busy. I didn't date or go out. When Sean, 43M, came along, I was swept off my feet because I wasn't expecting to find someone that I liked so much. We shared the same sense of humor, and I became really attracted to him, both emotionally and physically. Sean is divorced. He has average office assistant skills and works for a small government agency. Our salary gap was not a huge deal as I invested a lot in my project. So whatever money I kept for myself went to my non-negotiable priorities. I take care of my family and pay bills. He did have hobbies that he spent time on, but when I met him, he was in between jobs and had to wait 4 months until he became active at his new job at the agency. We were both tight on money. I was very happy to have a guy who didn't pressure me to wear certain styles. I'm more of a flats and comfy clothes lady. When my ex before him demanded that I look trendy and said things that nullified my self-esteem. I knew he was on food stamps, very briefly, and chalked it up to a bad situation that was temporary. There was huge mutual acceptance. We tried to start a small consulting company, but it didn't work out. I noticed that he wasn't ready to co-manage, and after a long conversation, we mutually decided to call it off. We had been talking about marriage for a while, and when he proposed, the subject of a prenup was no surprise, as we had already agreed on having one. Even if I had nothing, I see it as a way to protect ourselves and each other from potential situations. I'm in a niche market that deals with loss prevention, and I've seen people getting into lawsuits. We had drafted a plan but had some tense moments. He closed off at the lawyer's office and created a tense environment during our second meeting. Nothing that we had agreed on was getting followed through, and he kept asking for things and raising the bar. He got his own lawyer, which would have been okay except that he never told me, and his attorney showed up, and I didn't even know he'd hired one. We had to pause the prenup after he almost bit my head off outside of my lawyer's office when I refused to give his daughter shares of my existing company. That's a no-go for me, and I'd rather stay unmarried. I built that company to leave something to my children. I'm the only parent looking out for them, as my ex has been kind of a deadbeat. Sean wasn't even in the picture when I started it. I will not create a trust fund for his child either, like he asked. None of these requests had been previously discussed, but came up once his lawyer showed up. I did agree to help her financially, give her an allowance, help pay for a car, pay full health insurance, contribute to her college housing, and contribute to her education. She has a successful mom, so my logic is that she already has someone willing to give her a good start in life, since Sean isn't financially able. His daughter is an adult, 18F, while my kids are in grade school, and I need to make sure they are taken care of, while she's already at an age where she can get a job. I offered to contribute to a fund for her first home, but it seems like nothing I offered was good enough. I love his kid, but I didn't raise her, and she will never see me as her mom, and I respect that. Her mom's family owns a business, and her mom owns her home in a very good area. It's not like she depends on me to have a good life. I wanted it to be fair since her mom, Sean, and I could contribute. So Sean and I had an argument, because he sent me a breakdown of how much I'm supposed to make off my business over the next few years. I lost my temper because it felt like a gotcha situation. I confronted him about my own kids and asked what he would contribute to them. He went silent, so I said I wanted their names on the deed to a piece of land that he owns but hasn't been able to develop because he doesn't have the funds. He was surprised and accused me of trying to dilute his inheritance to his daughter and being generally unfair since she has less than what my kids will end up having. I just wanted him to see my point, but I made things worse. We used to be able to talk outside of the prenup, but now if I don't get his sarcasm, it's his dry behavior that's driving me crazy. He said he's surprised at my greed and accused me of othering his child. I'm trying to figure out if I came across as a bad stepmother. Also, I'm not ruling out helping all our kids start their own businesses if they want to, but I can't guarantee its success since we are not there yet. Canceling the engagement sounded like the most sensible decision, and I'm astonished this is actually happening. I don't know how to navigate. His last messages have been very hurtful, and he says I'm showing my true colors and told me thank you for my dishonesty about how I truly feel about his daughter. My best friend is pissed and threatens to put him on blast if he keeps this up. I'm confused since I didn't expect our relationship to end like this. AITA? Update. I broke up with him since the whole deal felt like a bitter divorce rather than a step towards married life. OP is not an AH for ending the engagement because Sean's demands are unreasonable and selfish, particularly insisting on giving his daughter shares of OP's company. Sean should be grateful for the help OP has been offering for his daughter, but he is not and is behaving entitled. So, he is an AH for being selfish, and I would give him 2 out of 5 on the AH scale. As for OP, she deserves 0 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's move to another story from Budget-Fishing 7420. AITA for refusing full custody of my daughter after my husband asked for a divorce. I, 31F, have been together with my husband Alex, 33M, for 7 years, married for 4 years. Alex was always really excited about the prospect of children from the beginning of our relationship. I was always on the fence. I've seen how hard single moms have it. I promised myself I'd never be in that position. Plus, I work as a software engineer. I love my career, and I didn't want to give it up to be a mom. After Alex and I got married, those fears went away. We were very much in love. I felt safe with him. I told him my fears, and he said all the right things to make them vanish. So we tried for a baby and had our daughter Ramona 2 years after we got married. The pregnancy and first year with the baby was extremely hard on me. I had multiple health problems during and after the pregnancy that were life-threatening and altered my body permanently. I was disabled and nearly died once in the 6 months after I gave birth. And during this time, my husband grew distant and became angry frequently when we'd speak. I spent a lot of time in and out of the hospital and was unable to work, so a lot of the baby care went to him during this time. It was all I could do to stay alive and get better, being separated from my daughter and husband so much. Eventually, I did get better enough to help more with the baby, but after I was discharged from the hospital, he barely spoke to me. I want to clarify early that at no time did I ever neglect our daughter if I was able to care for her. I leaned on him a lot during this period, but I was also fighting for my health and my life so that I could continue to be there for her. If I had pushed myself too hard, I would have made it worse, or be dead. We stayed in a state of limbo like this for a while. I was still in recovery, Not back to 100% yet, but able to resume a somewhat normal life, and we shared more responsibility with Ramona. I tried talking to him many times over the next 6 months, but it was more of the same thing. He wouldn't speak to me, or he'd get angry in every little thing I did, insist I was making things up and blame me for somehow criticizing him. It was a constant deflection from whatever was bothering him. I got another job about 9 months after the pregnancy, and things seemed to improve for a while, or at least I thought. Not long after Ramona's first birthday, Alex served me with divorce papers. He said he'd fallen out of love with me a long time ago and he was ready to start anew. I was in shock. Things had started to improve between us, but he explained that was because he'd decided to leave, and he felt less unhappy. It was a Saturday when this happened, so I made sure he was going to be home to care for Ramona for the weekend. Then I packed a bag and left until Sunday evening. I didn't say where I was going, and truthfully, I didn't really go anywhere but drive. I drove 2 states over by the time I stopped. I needed to think. When I got back Sunday evening, he was pissed I'd left him alone with our daughter. He's always seemed really put off any time he had to care for her alone. This time was no exception. I sat him down and very carefully said, "I will grant you a no-contest divorce, but I am not accepting full custody of Ramona." If he was only pissed before, he was explosive now, and everything he hated about me finally came out. That I was a horrible mother, that I wasn't strong enough to even be a mother, that I was too weak to carry a child, and now I was abandoning her. I very calmly stated that I loved her dearly and would not abandon her, that I would pay child support and visit her every other weekend, that I would be there for her in any way I could. But I had been very clear with him when we got married that I would never be a single mom. He became borderline violent at this, grabbing things like he was going to throw them and screaming that I was ruining his life on purpose. I wasn't going to stick around to be talked to like this, so I went and checked on Ramona, gave her a kiss, then grabbed my bag and left again. A couple days later, his mother texted me. He'd left Ramona with her for a few days, and she had some nasty things to say to me. That a mother should never leave her child, etc. I told her it wasn't her business, and that her son doesn't get a free pass to restart his life, because his wife nearly died when she was pregnant, and he became resentful with the responsibility. He's also blown up my phone asking me when I'm going to come back, so you can take your daughter. But I've only replied, "I've already told you what's going to happen here. I love my daughter immensely, and I will be a provider for her. I will always support her, but I won't be her primary parent. So, AITA?" OP is not the AH for refusing full custody. She was clear about her boundaries from the start, and despite her health struggles, she hasn't abandoned her daughter. OP is still committed to supporting and being present for her child, but her husband's behavior, lack of communication, and anger make it unreasonable to expect her to take on full custody. She's protecting her well-being while ensuring her daughter remains cared for. Let's now move on to the next story from Boring Man, 1982. AITA for telling my friend to stop mentioning pictures my wife posts. I've got a friend who the last couple of years has turned a bit tatey. He has been wronged by a couple of women in the past couple of years. One left him and got married within 3 months, the other stole a lot of his money. But he seems to have a particular dislike for women selling content, or just generally being confident in how they look. That point brings me on to my wife. She's 39 and we've been together since school. She's a very fit and attractive woman, and her main hobby is pole dancing. She loves it and has been doing it for a few years. She's really good and she loves it so much. It's great to see her really excelling at something and being so passionate about it. She posts a lot of pictures and video of herself pole dancing on accounts that only friends can follow. So it's not like she does this for attention. Even though I've told her if she ever wanted to, I wouldn't mind, as a few of her friends have quite big followings. And sometimes when they do shows, my wife is in the photos and videos and gets a lot of positive comments. At the weekend, I went to my friend's to help him with some DIY, and he asked me if I mind my wife posting what she posts. I said, not at all, it doesn't bother me. He then said, "You are part of the problem. Women are getting too much ego, and it's bad enough when it's single women, but married women shouldn't be doing that." I told him, if he's that bothered, then don't look and unfollow her. He said that won't change anything, and it's the culture being created around women getting validation for their bodies or some like that. I got a bit wound up at this point and asked him if he'd like to ring my wife and tell her himself. He said no, he was just talking to me man to man, and I need to grow a backbone. I told him I'm not the one with the backbone problem if he can't handle a bit of flesh and gets offended by it, and he's the weak one. I ended up leaving, and a few mutual friends have said that while I was right, he's going through a hard time and is a bit vulnerable to this way of thinking. I personally think that's bullshit, and we need to tell him he's heading down a wrong path. Me and my friend are both 41. I forgot to mention that. TLDR. Friend is heading down a Tate wormhole and said my wife shouldn't be posting pictures of herself pole dancing. I told him to grow up and not be so easily offended. OP is not an AH here for defending his wife's choice to share her passion. Standing up for his wife's autonomy and calling out the behavior is completely justified. OP's friend has a very narrow mind, and his misogynistic behavior is not justifiable. No sensible person would tolerate it. OP's friend is a big AH, so I would give him a 2.5 out of 5 on the AH scale. As OP is completely justified, I would give him 0 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now move on to the next story from Practical Debate 807. AITA for confronting my daughter-in-law about her constant lying and refusing to apologize. I, 56F, have a son, and things have been tense because of his wife, Emily, 28F. I've noticed over the past year that Emily tends to stretch the truth or flat-out lie about things, both big and small. At first, it was little things like saying she couldn't come to family dinners because of work, only to post on social media that she was out with friends. Then it escalated to bigger things. One example that really bothered me happened recently. We were both supposed to attend a charity fundraiser. I was there the entire evening and never saw her. When I later asked if she had made it, she insisted that she had been there the whole time and even said she saw me, but was too busy to come say hi. This wasn't true. I know for a fact she wasn't there. The volunteers list was small, and I definitely would have seen her. We were all in the same room. More recently, she lied about something involving a family event. We were planning a small gathering for my husband's birthday, and Emily told me she'd arranged a cake from his favorite bakery. The day of the party, she showed up empty-handed, claiming they lost the order. When I called the bakery to see what happened, they had no record of any order ever being placed. That was the last straw for me. I pulled her aside later and confronted her about her constant lying. I tried to be calm and respectful, but I told her that her dishonesty was starting to affect how I viewed her and that it was creating tension in the family. She literally messed up my husband's birthday with these lies. She completely denied it and got really upset, saying I was making her out to be a bad person and that I was overreacting. My son got involved and is now angry with me. The whole thing has caused a rift, and now Emily refuses to come to any family gatherings unless I apologize. I feel like I had every right to call her out, and I have nothing to apologize for. AITA here? OP is not an AH for confronting her daughter-in-law about lying, especially when the dishonesty affects family events. However, OP could have approached differently and responsibly avoiding unnecessary tension. As for scores, I would rate OP 0 and OP's daughter-in-law 1.5 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now jump on to the next story from the -fat-ninja. AITA for no longer being concerned that my son refuses to deal with me? Let me start this off by saying I love my child. I fought for many years with his mother to be in his life, only to be met with consistent resistance. She honestly didn't care if I was there or not. As long as the child support was paid, I heard nothing from her. I truly believe she did not want me in his life. Planning things on my scheduled visitations and not allowing them to be made up the following weekend got aggravating. When it came to things he wanted to do, I was not going to stop him. I did not mind sacrificing the time. I understand he's going to want to hang out with friends, his girlfriend, and go to family events. I made the biggest mistake by telling her one day that he could come when he wanted. He has friends, a girlfriend, and is a teen. I understand. I was that age once. Let him have fun. This ultimately backfired. After that phone call, I saw him once more, and that was it. To this day, I do not know what was said to him, and that was 7 years ago. I don't have his phone number or email. To be clear, he's now an adult, and I still don't know his phone number. He refuses to see or speak to me or anyone on my side of the family. She let him talk to my mother before she passed, so she could say goodbye, only to turn around and say, I kept it from him, knowing I told her long before. I ended up having a conversation with a friend about this, as she had asked me about it. I told her, I've yet to hear from him, and am not worried about it. I've stopped worrying about things I can't control long ago. She asked me a question, how would you feel if he never bothered with you for the rest of your life, never let you know if you were a grandparent, and just never let you know anything about his life? I told her I had thought about that before, and to be honest, it wouldn't bother me. I've been estranged for 7 years now. I've missed all the major milestones, missed seeing him become an adult, and at this point, I have no idea who he is. He is basically a stranger to me. At some point, you accept that this is your situation, and there's not much you can do. After a while, you stop caring because you realize you'll drive yourself crazy and keep yourself depressed over something you have zero control over. This answer did not go over well. Let me state this first. She's married and has children. I believe this will add context to why she responded the way she did, which I understood and respected, as we all have our views, but I do not agree with. She said that I have become heartless, cold, and she can't believe I'd think that way after all the years of fighting I did. She said she never in a million years would think I would have thought like that. You are a parent. You are supposed to never stop fighting no matter how many walls you have to climb. I'm truly shocked and disappointed that you'd think like this. I love you. We've been good friends for many years, but I can't agree with your line of thought on this. So Reddit, what do you think AITA for my view of this situation with my son? OP is not an AH here because he had been trying to be the part of the, but he was always met with rejection. Now, if he has decided to move on, he must not be blamed. At least he is not an AH, so I would give him 0 out of 5 on the AH scale, and his ex-wife deserves at least 1 out of 5 on the AH scale. Now, let's move on to the next story from major_opposite_9592. AITA, for calling my stepmom selfish during family therapy. I'm 17F in family therapy with my dad and stepmom. My dad wanted us to talk through our problems because my stepmom has been really upset lately that I have shut her out of my life in a pretty big way, and she just wants to be closer. My mom died when I was 5, and I have 2 older brothers who are 20 and 23. My stepmom moved in when I was 8, and she and my dad got married when I was almost 11. We always got along okay, but I never thought of her as a second mom or the strongest mom figure in my life. My mom left videos for each of us. My dad got some birthday ones and a Christmas and wedding anniversary video. My brothers and I got every birthday until 18 that she'd miss, milestone birthdays, Christmas, and big events like our own weddings and babies. After Dad remarried, I started to watch mine more at Christmas, and I'd maybe watch my birthday videos twice. My dad remarrying made me think of Mom more and made me miss her more. It felt more real that life had moved on without her, and Dad really fell in love with someone else. My dad watched his whenever his birthday or Christmas would happen too, but a year after he remarried, he turned 40, and she started making faces whenever one of us would watch a mom video. And whenever Dad would smile watching the video, she would look annoyed, pissed. After that, she suggested she could keep mine safe for me because I was so young, but I didn't trust her to do that. After 3 years of noticing this stuff, she told Dad the videos made her unhappy and uncomfortable, and she felt like an outsider at Christmas when he looked so in love with my mom. She also said she felt like the videos were a roadblock between her and us, me and my brothers. Dad compromised that he would watch his less, and she wouldn't say anything to us. I saw my dad struggle with that for years. I saw him go to watch one of Mom's videos and stop himself. Then my stepmom and I started fighting because I didn't want her to touch the discs the messages were recorded on. She was also upset when my brothers did backups of all the discs, so we'd always have the messages, even if the originals were broken. She told us we valued those more than we valued most people. Dad told her to leave us alone. But I stopped being as friendly with her as I was, and shut her out. I left her out of prom stuff last year that she wanted to do with me, and I always say no to hanging out with her. This brought us to therapy, and last week I spoke my mind and said I think she's incredibly selfish for making Dad feel bad about watching the videos Mom left for him. I said Mom was his first wife, the mother of his children, and if she really loved him, she'd want him to have them. But she doesn't like knowing she came second, and yet she joined the family anyway. I also mentioned why I never trusted her with mine. She was so upset because she had no idea I had picked up on and heard so much. She cried and said I didn't need to destroy her feelings like that. AITA? OP is not an AH for expressing her feelings and would be rated 0 on the AH scale. Welcome to the Am I the A-hole story from _assistance 281, where OP ruins his sister's life by revealing to her fiancé that she is infertile. I will try to keep this as simple as possible. My 26M sister, Emma 29F, was very sick in high school. Her choice was either to die young or be able to conceive children. It was a hard decision for her, and she doesn't like to talk about it. She has been dating Adam 29M for about 6 years, and he is really nice. The whole family loves him. He proposed to her last year, and they were planning to marry in March next year. But here is the problem. Adam really wants children. He always plays around with our little cousins at family events and talks about what he wants to do and teach his future children. We always thought that they were just going to be adopting, so we never brought it up. But since the engagement, I have noticed that he always talks about them as their children, as in biological. I don't know how to explain it, but it didn't seem like they were going to adopt a child. After thinking about it for a while, I decided to talk with Emma about it. I asked her out and gently brought up the topic. She did seem a bit angry about me mentioning it, but she explained to me that Adam treats adoption the same as giving birth and that he is happy all the same. It sounded believed, but I know my sister, she was lying. During the entire conversation, she could not look me in the eye. After a month, I finally decided to talk to Adam. This Sunday, we were gathered at my parents' house for dinner, and while everyone was busy and we were alone, I asked Adam how the adoption proceedings were going. Were they going to start now or after they got married? He looked surprised and asked me what I was talking about. I mentioned how he wants many kids, so they should probably be starting with the whole process early. He asked me if Emma wants to adopt a child because they had never talked about it. Since my parents were coming back, I asked him to talk to me later. Around the end of dinner, I asked him for some help with my phone and lead him to the balcony, and I was honest with him. I asked him if he knew that Emma can't have children. At first, he thought I was joking, but when he saw that I was serious, he got this dead look on his face. I told him some of the details and said that it would probably be best if he talked with Emma for the full story. He was quiet for the rest of the evening, when they got how they apparently got in a major fight. I know that he is currently staying with friends and asked for the ring back, but nothing else. Emma hates me, and our parents are mostly on her side and think that I shouldn't have said anything. I thought I was doing the right thing. This is such a huge secret to keep from your future partner, but maybe it really wasn't my place to say anything. OP is not AH for prioritizing honesty over his sister, who had withheld a very crucial information from her boyfriend because biological children are a major deal breaker for some people. However, OP's method of disclosing the information was intrusive, but he is not an AH. Instead, his sister is an AH, and I would rate her 3.5 out of 5 on the AH scale. Now let's move on to the next story from feeling_blessed_for Eve, where OP is refusing to drop her ex-husband's last name. I, 56F, divorced my husband 2 years ago after 26 years of marriage. We have 4 kids, and the split was amicable. He came out as gay, and we mutually agreed to part ways. Changing my name wasn't a priority. Updating IDs, legal documents, and bank accounts would be a huge hassle. I still use his last name on official documents but go by my maiden name socially. Recently, he got engaged to a wonderful guy. I've been supportive of their relationship, but during my grandson's birthday party, my ex suddenly asked if I'd consider dropping his last name. His fiancée chimed in, saying it makes him uncomfortable that I still use it. I was caught off guard and awkwardly joked that unless they want to spend hours in lines at various government offices, I wasn't going to change it. My ex didn't laugh. He insisted it's about starting a new chapter and wants me to move on. The whole situation felt bizarre. For 2 years, it's never been an issue, and now they're ganging up on me. After the party, my ex called and argued that keeping his name makes it hard for his fiancée to feel like they're starting a fresh life. I countered that our kids still use the same name, and it would feel strange for me to be the odd one out. What really hurt was learning from my youngest son that his fiancée feels threatened by my name, assuming I'm clinging to some claim on my ex. I've made it clear I have zero interest in rekindling anything, but it feels like I'm being pressured to erase a part of my identity. My ex admitted his fiancée is uncomfortable because he sees me keeping the name as a power play. I feel like I'm caught between trying to keep peace and being forced into something just because his fiancée is insecure. They want me to go through the hassle of changing everything for their comfort. I told my ex that I'll consider it later, maybe after they're married and settled. But now he's furious, saying I'm being petty and selfish. My friends think I should stand my ground, but my kids are divided. One thinks I should just give in to keep the peace, while the other agrees that it's ridiculous to change it just because his fiancée feels insecure. I'm frustrated. I don't see why a name on some legal documents is such a big deal, but they're making me feel like the villain. So, AITA for refusing to drop my ex-husband's last name, even though he's getting remarried? OP's not an AH for keeping her ex-husband's last name. She is doing all this for their shared children, and the insecurities of her ex's fiancé are unreasonable, and OP's ex and her fiancé are being jerk here, and I would give them 1.5 out of 5 on the AH scale. Now let's jump onto the next story from Electronic-Tension 70. I, 35F, have known my best friend, 34F, since she was born. Our parents were friends in college. As long as I can remember, we've always been inseparable. We went to different high schools and then different states for college, and yet we have remained closer than ever. This bond grew especially because my parents died when I was 18, and since then, her parents took it upon themselves to act as my family, inviting me over for the holidays, sending me care packages, etc. And so, she became the closest thing I have to a sibling. A few weeks ago, my best friend, let's call her Anya, her fiancé, and I visited our hometown where we stayed with Anya's parents for a few days to plan her wedding. It was all going well until we got to the guest list. The guest list had pretty much been finalized at this point, but it was my first time seeing it. I noticed that my name didn't have a +1, and that my wife's name wasn't on the list at all. I assumed that it must have been a mistake, so I asked Anya about it casually in front of everyone. As soon as I asked, she got all tense and looked at her fiancé and parents weirdly. At this point, it was clear to me that there was something going on that I didn't know about. I asked her what was going on, and Anya cleared her throat awkwardly before telling me that the reason my wife wasn't on the list was because she wasn't invited. I was shocked. Anya and my wife aren't particularly close, but they have always been friendly with each other and never had bad things to say about the other person. I asked her why, thinking it might have been a financial issue. She again looked around awkwardly before eventually telling me the truth. She was afraid that having my wife at her wedding and us being seen as an openly queer couple would take attention away from her on her big day. I feel it is important to mention at this point that Anya and I are both South Asian, and Anya's wedding is going to take place in India, although we live in the US, so that all her relatives and parents' friends are able to attend. At such a traditional event, it would indeed be an uncommon sight to see an openly queer couple together, and honestly, it likely would take some of the attention off of Anya on her wedding day. Knowing that, I can't really blame Anya for wanting one day where the focus is solely on her and her soon-to-be husband. However, I also don't think I can attend an event where my partner isn't welcome, regardless of the reason. My wife is the most important person in the world to me, and although I respect Anya's decision, I can't bring myself to go to another country and to the wedding without my wife. Anya, her parents, and our family friends are all extremely hurt by this decision and are telling me that I am being selfish. After everything that Anya and her family have done for me, I can understand why. But it still doesn't change my decision to not attend the wedding. AITA? OP is not the AH. While Anya has the right to curate her wedding, excluding OP's wife because of discomfort with their relationship is hurtful and dismissive. OP's decision reflects loyalty to her marriage, and it's unfair to expect her to attend an event where her partner isn't welcome. Anaya is being an AH here, so I would give her 1.5 out of 5 on the AH scale. As for OP, she gets 0 out of 5. Let's now jump onto the next story from Falcon Reasonable, 6868. I apologize in advance. English is not my first language. Some details will be kept vague to try avoid being recognized. This is not a throwaway account, and I'd like to keep it. Recently, I30F went to a double birthday celebration. Basically just two people's birthday rolled into one celebration. A close female relative, let's say Bonnie, was chatting with my dad. Not a closed discussion or anything. I tried to join in with how I didn't like power training when I did it. Not overly negative. I just didn't like what it did to my body. She replies, "You are talking about things you know nothing about. I embrace this part. I do it at least 5 days a week, so I know what I am talking about. I hadn't said anything about how it works technically. I just have bad body image and didn't like it bulking me." She went on a whole tangent, sounded like shouting at me. So I started responding with, "And why is this such a big deal to you? I only said XYZ?" She responded with the exact same responses and how I butted in a conversation I was not part of, knew nothing about. I felt extremely talked down on and dismissed. I tried to indicate it was too much for me and to stop, but in the end I shouted at her to leave me alone. Had to do it a few times and she just wouldn't. When she finally stopped, I directed my words at my partner, basically saying WTF, as I was extremely shocked and hurt and could feel a meltdown coming. I tried to calm down using my headphones. I have autism. So I asked my partner if we could leave. We got our coats and went to leave while fought the tears. Tried to tell my dad about it and that I tried my best. He said was. So did she. He tends to call me too sensitive or cut me off. I hugged the people I felt able to hug. Bonnie's daughter gave me several hugs. She heard it all and felt extremely bad for me. We managed to leave, and out of sight, I started truly sobbing. I tried to put things down as best I could, but it was very difficult, and I felt very angry and disappointed through it. Some disclaimers. My dad is not perfect, but he is there for me, and I love him dearly. I just want advice and some feedback. I will not be able to process a lot of emails and will likely miss comments, but I will do my best. Thank you in advance. OP is certainly not an AH because she just prioritized her mental health in this difficult situation, and her choice is the best. So I would give her 0 out of 5 scores on the AH scale. Let's now jump on the next story from Mr_KJR. This is very graphic. If don't like reading about child abuse, I would avoid this post. I will be leaving out key details, so you hopefully can't find out anyone's identification. If you find my mother's information, please keep it to yourself. When I was 3, my dad was out of the picture due to being in the special forces. My mother was left alone to watch me and my brother. We were often neglected, left home alone, wasn't fed, and physically abused. I ended up having my arms broken, several ribs, as well as several fingers and toes. My brother didn't get off so lucky, and she ended up killing him right in front of me. She went to jail for a very short amount of time. During the time she was in jail, my dad came home from the military and continued the abuse. I think he was frustrated about the situation and took it out on me. As an adult, I finally understand what my dad went through, though I would never do the same to my kid if I was in the same situation. My mother would also beat my dad. She even ran him over with a car several times. My mother got out of prison after a very short sentence. I eventually learned more about the case and found out the court case didn't include the abuse to either of us, just the fact that she killed my brother and she pleaded insanity. I tried to forgive my mom regardless, meeting her maybe once or twice a month. When we met, all I would hear is that she wants grandchildren, even though the last kid she had, she beat to death brutally. When I took her out to Mother's Day at this nice restaurant, she would just talk about how she would get railed by countless guys while tied up. Keep in mind I was 17 at the time, and was super uncomfortable about the whole situation. All the people around us just stared, and I was so embarrassed. I just thought, how can a person act like this in public? After this, I stopped seeing her nearly as much, maybe 10 times, over the next 5 years. Time goes forward. I'm getting married. My mom comes into the picture and starts getting upset because several of my family members don't want her at the wedding. I told her she can come anyways. I think it's her right as I'm her son. It blows up, and she ends up getting extremely mad at people and blaming everything on me. At this point, I've given up. I gave her so many chances, and I just can't deal with her anymore. The thing is, everyone on her side of the family sides with her, and they are all just as vulgar and nasty as she is, so I decided to cut off the entire family. I've had people die, people I used to love, and I feel nothing. I didn't attend their funerals, and people on my mom's side see me as a monster worse than her. But I don't see them as family, nor do I think I should care about their life when they didn't care about my brothers. Now I'm finally having a kid at the age of 25. We haven't told her or plan on it. Still feel pretty guilty for not saying anything, but I feel like she doesn't deserve to be around me or my family. OP is not the AH for cutting off an abusive and toxic family, especially after enduring immense trauma and betrayal. It is completely reasonable, and protecting OP mental health and future child is the best choice. The guilt over estrangement is understandable, but it does not make OP an AH. So, I would give OP 0 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now move on to the next story from tall-ant-4477. My older sister, 34F, was born without the reproductive organs required to have a biological child. Because of her condition, she also has some other health problems, which disqualify her from adopting due to the uncertainty around her quality and length of life. She was aware for most of her life that she couldn't have biological children. That was discovered when she was still very young, but the rest came throughout her 20s. She had dreams of motherhood and had lists of baby names she wanted to use. But she will never be able to use them on children that are hers. What I, 28M, did not know at the time was she had saved her baby names and was hoping she would get to name or help name my future children. My wife, 27F, and I are expecting our first child. We haven't announced the but my sister thinks we're having a girl and shared her girl names with us. We thanked her and said we, wife and I, would discuss what the name would be at some point. My sister looked upset by the response, and she then shared her boy names thinking she got it wrong. We gave her the same response. My mom suggested a couple of months ago that it would be generous and kind to let my sister have some input. I told her we felt it was better if we named our child ourselves. My wife and I did look at the list, just to see if we liked any of the names. We did not. Names on the lists included Elizabeth, Hannah, Rosemary and Francesca for girls and James, Edward, Patrick, and Michael for boys. Those just aren't to our preference. None of them were, and there were more names. My sister mentioned the names again recently, and she said we should pick Elizabeth for a girl and Michael for a boy. She said that's what she'd do if she were having the baby. I told her we hadn't made our mind up yet, but we're still in discussions about it. She offered to help, and I said no thanks. My wife and I want to figure it out between us. My sister said she wants to be a part of naming all our babies, that she would love to share all her endless thoughts on names that she'll never get to put into her own kid. I told her I understood she wanted that, but my wife and I as parents would name our child, and she does not get to be a part of that. I told her I understood that was hurtful to her, but she does not get a say. I also asked her to please stop bringing it up. My sister told me I could let her have at least a little say in this, and I said sorry, but no. She cried to Mom, who thinks we should be more sensitive, while my dad told my sister I wasn't wrong, and she needs to accept that she doesn't get to name our baby. My response has caused a divide among my parents and sister and me. It has been made clear my mom thinks I lack compassion, and my sister believes I'm hurtful to her. AITA. Though it is unfortunate that OP's sister cannot have children, but it doesn't mean she should be given the power to control OP's life decision, particularly about choosing names for her children. Now is the time to move to the next story from Highesty Hayes. I go to a Bruegel's Bagels about once every other week, a very suburban bagel chain that serves bagels as sandwiches, and an array of other breakfast goods. Today I got in there around 30 minutes before closing. I'm the only customer. It's a small location with 2 people behind the counter. I order 2 bagels with cream cheese, toasted. The person manning the cash register rings me up. I input my debit card. I don't tip. They hand me the bag a minute later. I say thanks and leave out the door. I get home and open the bag, and the bagels are poorly toasted, only slightly warm, and my house is 3 minutes away from the location, and also not cut. It's a silly thing to write on the internet about. The food is totally fine to eat, and it tastes mostly good, but it strikes me as a sloppy job. First, I jumped to the conclusion that I didn't tip, and they were like, "F this guy," and did the bare minimum. My personal stance on tipping is that if I'm standing at a cashier and ordering food that's going to come out a moment or a few moments later, tipping is totally off the table. It kind of pisses me off when some places turn the card reader around and it says 25% tip as the base. If I had ordered something complex, or something where a person was going to put effort into that item, I would have tipped. But what I ordered strikes me as almost the simplest item on the menu to curate. And I think the reason why I'm writing on this form about this is because this isn't the first time this has happened at this location. In previous months, again, where I was not tipping and ordering the same order, there were similar small errors, mostly around the bagel not being toasted, usually not at all, poorly cut or not cut, etc. I also thought about the angle of, it's late in the day for this person's shift. Perhaps they are just really tired and are missing the mark, which is somewhat understandable. But it's shitty for me and my experience buying a overpriced bagel. But I thought back to the incidents that occurred over the past few months and thought that I might be the asshole not throwing them an extra couple of dollars. Right now, my mindset is that I'm just going to avoid that joint and use other breakfast food options, and to also just get my own bagel supplies from the grocery store. I stopped going to that Bruegel's after being previously annoyed at their service, and thought to give them another go recently, but I think it's over with them. As an aside, this is a non-conclusive list of scenarios where I would totally tip. 1. I sit down and food is brought to me. A server comes to my table. 2. I am given advice on what I should do. Order. 3. I know that see the individual regularly and we have good interactions. 4. There's some type of skill or craftsmanship put into the product. 5. I spend an extended period of time with that person for that service. That is, an Uber ride. I used to work in the service industry. In my opinion, it's almost always a place to be. I personally think that tipping shouldn't exist because it's mostly a tool for corporations and small businesses to pass on costs to the customer rather than provide people a stable working income. It's just bad for the working class in my opinion. TLDR. I'm annoyed that people won't fully toast my bagels and cut them because I refuse to tip for what I perceive to be an extremely simple service. OP is not the AH for not tipping, as tipping is typically reserved for more personalized or complex service. However, expecting consistently great service shortly before closing or after past frustrations might be unrealistic. Let's now move on to the next story from expensive_Ioli 8185. My 16M mom died when I was 5. When I was 8, my dad remarried. He started dating my stepmother a year before, and he talked to me and my sister, 24F, about it before. He told us we didn't need to see our stepmother as a new mom, or even a mom figure if we weren't comfortable. But if we could be respectful and give her a chance to be something. He told us if there was anything off, he wanted to hear that too. We gave our blessing while also saying we didn't want her to be new mom. And Dad said he supported that and would make it clear to her. They got married, and things seemed okay. Dad never called her our mom or anything, and she didn't really. There were times she called us her kids, and she'd try to do some of the mom things like Mother's Day activities, or sometimes we'd have stuff a parent-kid sports day, and she'd want to go instead of Dad since most kids have their mom. But Dad would gently remind her that she wasn't mom. My sister and stepmother had a really rocky and rough relationship, and they don't speak much. My sister tolerated her for Dad after the wedding more than anything. But at first, she was okay with her. She just hated that she didn't accept the no-mom role. We spent after school with our grandparents until Dad got home. He'd finish work before my stepmother. So she wasn't doing all the mom stuff. She did offer to quit her job to do it or to go to part-time or something, but Dad and her talked, and he asked if she'd be okay doing all that and not getting recognized equally. So she kept her job, but still tried to fill the mom role sometimes. My dad and her started trying for kids and they ended up going to fertility doctors and stuff. Even when that was happening, she still tried to fill that role for me. But I still don't want her to be mom. The problem now is she can't have bio kids. Nothing can help. Dad has been comforting her about it. But now she has decided that I could let her adopt me and we could work on changing our relationship. I said no when asked and told Dad. He decided they needed couples therapy. We were at her family's house Sunday afternoon and they were talking to her about the infertility stuff, and she had mentioned she still has one kid, aka me, and that we were maybe making that official, and even if we didn't, she was still mom to someone. It annoyed me, and my dad wasn't in the room at the time, and I said no. Her family all looked at me, and I said she isn't my mom, and we'll never make it official because it's not true. She started crying hard, and my dad heard, and came in, and he brought us home. They got into a big fight that night, and my dad told me I did nothing wrong, but she said I humiliated her in front of her family. AITA? OP is certainly not an AH. He clearly communicated his boundaries about not viewing his stepmother as a mom. Thought it was the wrong time, but it was not wrong to tell his stepmom that she was not his real mom. His stepmother's persistent attempts to fill the mom role led to this confrontation. So, she is being an AH, and I would give her 2.5 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now move on to the next story from main-swordfish 3805. I am on the spectrum, so it's hard for me to tell. My older sister is diagnosed with anxiety. I know anxiety can come in different forms, but I believe, and my sister as well, that someone is using their anxiety to manipulate me. I am a girl. The guy named Trey is the son of Dad's friend. Sometimes he'd come around and we became friends. Then he asked me out and we dated for a month. We go to the same school. This is the first year we had classes together. He makes it well known that he has anxiety to me and everyone around us. We have 4 classes together. In 2, we sit at the same table. Here's the issue. I suspect that Trey is faking his anxiety or using it as manipulation. In the 2 classes where we sit close, he always suddenly starts breathing heavily and working up a worried expression, burying his face in his hands and shaky breath. It lasts for about 20 seconds, then repeats about 20 minutes later. I know to be polite and ask if he's okay, but it just feels very off. From knowing my sister, she seems genuinely scared in panic attacks. Trey doesn't seem scared, he just seems calmer immediately after someone gives him empathy. Sometimes I even see a smirk, or he'll suddenly go into an anxiety attack, saying, "It feels like the world is caving in," over and over, and then run over to adjacent tables to put his head on their desks and get their sympathy. Kinda distracting IMO, but he doesn't leave until someone asks him if he's alright. It just is kinda off, like usually in anxiety attacks you'd be just trying to get through it. So I'd find it hard to immediately think about running to adjacent tables and making it known. I thought most people don't want others to know when these panic attacks happen. He keeps doing it more and more. It's like a daily occurrence by now. He only started after we began dating. In the 2 classes we aren't sitting close, he will never have a single anxiety attack. He'll be loudly talking to friends. It just is kinda off, because his behavior isn't ever consistent. Anyways, he doesn't do this anxiety stuff in front of Dad or when we all are together. The guy seems charismatic otherwise, kind and polite. But yeah, after a month, I felt like he was fishing for attention and sympathy from others, so I broke up with him. Politely, of course. I just made some excuse that I wasn't ready. Needed time to phrase it correctly to Dad, so I kept the news to myself. Well, our families had dinner together last weekend, and in front of everyone, Trey asked me why I broke up with him. Huge shock for everyone. He started accusing me of seeing someone else as the reason, since I was giving him less attention at school. And I didn't handle this very well, but I was embarrassed and mad, and impulsively said that it was because he was a dramatic person and manipulating others with his anxiety. Dead silence, awkward drive home. Dad is mad at me. Other family is mad at me too. AITA for having this opinion, and AITA for my actions? Edit. Wow, this blew up a lot more than I expected. Thanks for all the support. I talked to my dad about it this morning, and he's on my side now. I think I can understand why he was mad at me at first, since I had never mentioned Trey's anxiety thing before. And my sister has anxiety, which makes him a little sensitive to that topic, especially if I'm accusing someone of faking. I'm just grateful for the help, and I appreciate it from every one of you. OP is certainly not an AH because she expressed her genuine concerns about her dad's behavior. However, she could have expressed them differently, but it doesn't make her AH. On the top of it, her honesty ultimately led to a better understanding with her dad. Let's now move on to the next story from Prudent-Seesaw-1732. My mom never wanted a boy. She wanted girls. Apparently her dream was 4 daughters, but she had me, 16M, first. I have seen photos and videos of the day I was born. She cried hysterically when they told her I was a boy. Then she refused to hold me. After we were cleaned up, she cried about not using the name she had chosen and said she didn't know how to move on from it. All this was caught on camera. Eventually, my paternal grandma took me, and she was the person to hold me in photos and videos taken during the rest of our hospital stay. My paternal grandma was my sole parent figure for the first 8 years of my life. She took care of me and I spent so much time at her house. Sometimes I was there for weeks. Then she had a brain bleed and died. So I was left with a mom who wanted girls and not a boy, and a dad who wanted to be a provider and nothing more. My mom had my sister Lily 2 years after me. So mom got her girl and Lily got all her attention. While I got grandma until I was 8 and then nobody. My mom and Lily are super close and mom adores Lily. Lily got the bigger bedroom. She gets the gifts. She gets all her favorite snacks. She gets to do all the extracurricular activities she could ever want. And her birthdays are huge parties with huge gifts. Christmas she gets at minimum 25 gifts from mom alone. Mom typically gets me one. Never anything I'd like or want, but thought that counts, which is 0. My mom's family don't act too interested in making up for my lack of parental love. And in the last couple of years, mom and I have argued more, and I give her a hard time. Dad's never around to give him one. But mom? If she wants to ignore me, then she can hear how shitty it is, and if she wants to treat my sister like a perfect angel, then she can hear about it. Mom has mentioned how I ruined her dream of 4 daughters. We were at mom's parents' house Friday, and mom gushed about Lily doing good on a project, and the scooter she got Lily to help her get around easier. She got Lily a custom helmet and a personalized lock for her scooter. She couldn't stop talking about it. And I told her she really does love to shower her favorite in gifts and praise. My mom's family told me I should take it easier on her, and said I should understand we had some little troubles because of mom's gender disappointment. I told them I don't owe her shit because she had gender disappointment, and that I didn't ask to be born to a mom who only wanted daughters. They told me I lacked adult understanding and compassion. AITA? OP is not an AH for expressing his valid feelings about his mother's favoritism and the emotional neglect he has been experiencing. While his family may believe he should show compassion for his mother's feelings, it's unfair for them to dismiss his pain. Welcome to Am I the A-Hole story from Shlo BYN, where 2 years ago OP's psycho niece attacks her for no reason, and OP's sister, instead of apologizing to OP, accused her of being a pedophile. Now, OP's family wants her to forget what happened and move on. AITA foregoing no contact with my sister and her family over her, implying that I'm a pedophile to the rest of our family? So I want to make this story quick, but there's a lot of small details that matter. Close to 2 years ago, I went to my sister's home for a birthday party for one of her children. She has like 6 or 7, who knows at this point. Anyway, while at this party, LAM sitting with my then boyfriend, he's my fiancé now, and one of my sister's spawn decided to start messing with me. We'll call her Savannah. Maybe 10 or 11. I really don't mind because I grew up with 5 siblings and a whole bunch of cousins, so rough play and messing around is totally normal in our family, or at least it was while I was growing up. So Savannah is slowly getting more and more rough with me, and I'm trying to keep my cool because this was the first time I had ever introduced my fiancé to my family. So after numerous smacks to the back of the head and random kicking, I tell Savannah that if she keeps it up, I'm going to get her back and tickle the crap out of her. I think she sees this as some sort of challenge, so a few minutes go by, and she comes back and hits me in the back of the head with a broomstick. Yes, a broomstick. So I get up, and she runs, and I chase her to her room, and I make good on my threat, and I tickle her in her ribcage and armpits. Now Savannah is not used to anyone stepping up to her. I have 14 nieces and nephews, and Savannah is the known bully. After I get done tickling her, we get up and go back to the party, and I go to the kitchen. Now I mentioned that Savannah is a known bully among the kids because she's bigger and meaner, and nobody ever steps up to her. So when I did, and won, I think she took it extremely personally. So now I'm in the kitchen with my sister, her mom, and some other family, and we're just chatting. Out of the corner of my eye, I see Savannah grab a massive kitchen knife out of the drawer, and to be honest, this kid kinda scares me. So Elle immediately said, "Hey, Savannah mom, Savannah has a knife." My sister turns and sees Savannah with this devilish grin, holding a knife like she's about to stab someone. Me. Everyone goes dead silent because they all see that Savannah was going my way with that knife. Savannah's mom takes the knife and they go off to another room so she can talk to Savannah because what the f. So some time goes by and my sister approaches me in front of several family members and basically tells me that it was my fault that Savannah was going to stab me. She implies that she was scared of me and wanted to defend herself and that I had no business because alone in a room with her daughter and how weird it is. Also, I can't portray this through text, but the way she was saying all of this and her tone of voice was heavily implying that I was a weirdo for being alone in a room with a little girl without anyone supervising. At this point, I see that my sister is obviously embarrassed by her daughter's actions. So instead of taking accountability, she's now trying to pin her behavior on me and paint her daughter out to be this innocent child who was just scared for her life. Yes, she tells me Savannah was scared for her life. So, before I even say a word, I tell my sister, thank you for the invite, but we're going to be leaving. I have zero patience for this family at this point, and I'm ready to leave. I guess after I left, my sister went on to slander me to my family and other siblings, and imply that I was touching on her daughter. Obviously, my family knows me, and they know Savannah, so absolutely nobody bought it, but they did tell me about it the next day. So fast forward 2 years, and I still refuse to speak to my sister or have my family anywhere near hers, and some of my family is telling me I need to forgive her and move on. However, I absolutely cannot. I cannot forgive what she did or what she said about me, and I never want to go near her or her spawn ever again. I mean, the things she was saying are serious accusations, and I'm not going to forgive her and wait around for her kid to hurt me and my family again. I guess I'm just getting tired of defending myself to my family, who wants me to forgive her so damn badly so we can be a family again. They all say my sister feels bad, and yet she's never apologized or said a word to me, and even if she did, I'd tell her to shove it. So I guess this is where I, as strangers on the internet AITA, also some small Savannah context that doesn't mean much to the story, but can give you an idea as to the kid I was dealing with. Savannah is a known liar, like a pathological liar, and everyone in our family knows it. She's extremely aggressive and very mean. She was expelled from her last elementary school for threatening to burn the school down so she could watch all of the little burn inside. She's physically attacked her siblings and has left them bleeding with zero remorse. She's also not some tiny little thing either. Savannah is stupid strong for her age. I think everything wrong with a child that could be wrong is Savannah, and for some reason, my sister continues to make excuses for her and baby her. Nobody in the family understands it. We all think my sister had too many kids and just decided to stop parenting them and hides it by claiming to be a gentle parenting type. TLDR. My sister's psychotic child told my sister disgusting lies about me to get out of trouble for pulling a knife on me. My sister believed her and went on to try and slander me to our family. Now my family wants me to forgive them and move on. OP is certainly not an AH, and her cutting off ties with her sister is completely justified because her sister's false implications of inappropriate behavior are extremely serious and damaging, even if the rest of the family didn't believe them. In this case, forgetting the past and moving on is not an option. If OP really wants to have any relationship with her sister, she must apologize to OP in front of the whole family. As for scores, I would rate OP 0 and her sister 4 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now move on to the next story from Q Weeds, where OP doesn't want his father's creepy wife to call her children her grandchildren. AITA for being upset that my dad's wife keeps insisting my future kids are her grandkids. My 24F mom died 2 days before my 17th birthday. She was diagnosed with cancer less than 6 months before, and the years we were expecting her to have were cut to months. I am the oldest of 4. My youngest brother had just turned 4 when my mom died, so he sadly does not remember her much. After my mom died, a lot of the childcare responsibilities fell on me. I already had been somewhat responsible for them. But after she died, I basically took her place as the main caregiver. As my dad worked long hours at work, and she was a SAHM, there was a lot of tension and a lot of fighting, and I moved across the country a few days after high school graduation, a year after my mom died. My dad started dating Wendy, fake name, less than 2 years after my mom died. This upset me a lot, as it felt too soon for me, considering my parents had been together my whole life, but after time I became more accepting of her and their relationship. Like I said before, I live halfway across the country, and I have only met her twice. My youngest brother does call her mom, but my other 2 siblings call her by her name. She also has 2 girls of her own, which are both under 12-ish. Anyway, onto what my actual post is about. Recently, within the past year or so, she has been continuously bringing up the idea of grandkids. She has said on numerous occasions that if me and my boyfriend had a kid right now, she'd be a grandma under 40. This made me extremely uncomfortable. Wendy isn't my mom, and in the past, she has said she understands I'm older, and she is not trying to replace my mom. So why would she call herself my non-existent children's grandmother? One time, we were on the phone, and she said something along the lines of, "Even if you and your boyfriend got engaged tomorrow, you wouldn't be married for at least another year, and then you wouldn't have a kid for probably around a year, and I'd be over 40 by then." This also really bothered me, because why is she trying to rush me into having kids when I am still young, and definitely not financially stable enough to have kids? This is not the only time she has brought up me having kids and her being their grandma. It is just the most recent time. I really don't understand her obsession with being a young grandmother when her oldest biological kid is around 12, so if she never married my father, being a grandmother wouldn't even be an option. Realistically, if she had asked me if my future kids would call her grandma, I probably would have said yes, because it does make sense. What really bothered me is her assuming that role without seeing how I felt about it. It's hard for me to see this situation objectively and from her perspective, as I obviously have a lot of feelings relating to my mother's passing and the fact that she will not be grandma. I also know that if my mother was still alive, she wouldn't be asking me when I plan on having kids at all. Her and my father were teenagers when they had me, so I knew she wanted me to wait until I was ready. It also seems like a small issue, and my dad is not the talkative type, so I'm not sure how to bring this up to him, or if I even should. Would I be an AH if I brought this up to either of them? Or am I overreacting? OP is not an AH for being upset by her stepmom's creepy behavior. OP's discomfort is valid, given the emotional complexity of losing her mother and her stepmom's unsolicited assumption of a grandmother role. As for scores, I would rate OP 0 out of 5 on the AH scale, and OP's stepmom 1 out of 5. Let's now jump onto the next story from Avent Girl demands her sister to kennel her dog if she wants OP to be at Thanksgiving. AITA for telling my family we won't come to Thanksgiving unless my sister kennels her dog? My husband, 33M, and I, 33F, have told my mom, 72F, that we won't come to Thanksgiving with our son, 6 months M, unless my sister, 39F, gets a sitter or kennels her one of her dogs, adult M, some kind of hound mix, because he has chased after my cat twice, and he killed a kitten last year that was in my mom's lap, and we didn't trust him around our baby. My mom and I had discussed tentative Thanksgiving plans 2 weeks ago. Yesterday I had asked my mom if she had talked to my sister yet about the possible plans, as she'll need to know soon to get a kennel booked, but she said she hasn't talked much to my sister, as she is having a rough time at work, elementary school teacher. Then she asked if there is any possibility, if we could have the dog at my mom's house for Thanksgiving, if he's in a crate the whole time. We plan to all be at my mom's house on Wednesday evening, Thanksgiving Day, then leave Thursday because it's a 2-hour drive for us, and 4 hours for my sister. I said no, he can't just be in a kennel because he'll have to come out to go to the bathroom and to eat, she said, but we'll have him under control when we let him out. My sister has 2 tall dog gates set up next to each other, within a foot of each other, to keep the dog controlled, and one time he jumped both of them. This hound once jumped her fence to chase after a deer. I said no. She said, "You know I wouldn't let anything happen to your baby. I would protect him with my body." I said, "No offense, but you are 5'2", 120 pounds. You are not strong enough to stop this 70 pounds dog. I'm 5'8 inches, and I wasn't strong enough the second time he went after my cat. Luckily the cat was under the bed, and the dog couldn't get to him, but I needed my husband's help to drag him away. And also, according to my sister's ex, who witnessed the death of the kitten, my mom did try to stop the dog from killing the kitten at that time, and she was unsuccessful. My sister is also 5'2 inches and can barely control the dog on a leash. The last time my mom brought this up, she said that the dog has never gone after a human before, so we don't know if he will go after a baby. I told my mom that I'm extremely offended that she would play Russian roulette with my baby. She responded that she wasn't playing Russian roulette with my baby, and is offended that I'm not sure what she was offended about because I interrupted and said she's not allowed to be offended that I'm offended. I told her this is a hard boundary, and if she asks again, we will not try to come for Thanksgiving at all. I told her she's asked us a few times, what if we have him in another room? And I am floored she would even consider this, or ask us again when we told her it's an absolute no. She said she's only asked once before, but I severely disagree. I think it's been more than that she's tried. I texted my sister yesterday and told her we are working on plans for Thanksgiving, but she'll need to kennel one of her 3 dogs, and to please let us know. But if she can't kennel him, so we can make alternative plans. We will be getting a sitter for one or both of our dogs too. She hasn't responded yet. AITA for telling my family we won't come to Thanksgiving if this dog is there. OP is not an AH for prioritizing her baby's safety, given the dog's history of aggressive behavior, including killing a kitten. OP's demand is in no way an overreaction, and the demand is completely justified. OP's sister and family are being unreasonable. In fact, they are jerks for being so irresponsible. So, I would give OP's family 2.5 on the AH scale, and OP gets 0 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now move on to the next story form, internal_mirror_84555. AITA, for planning my wedding with the intention that my parents won't be invited. I, 28, F. I'm recently engaged to my partner of 4 years. We got together just before the pandemic kicked off, so most of my family haven't really interacted with him much. A huge precursor for this is that I was a parentified middle child, not only with a large age gap with my young sibling, but their dad is also mine, and my older sibling's adoptive parent. Although I have always considered him my dad as well in recent years, it's become glaringly evident that that dynamic is not exactly mutual. I've never had a relationship with my bio dad, and he passed in 2021. Our mom, however, had a very traumatic marriage with him, although deciphering what exactly was truth and what was spouted hatred, we will never be sure of. My sister and I resemble our mom, but I unfortunately resemble my biologically paternal grandmother the most. My mother subconsciously resents me for this, though she would never admit it. I have always been the least worried about child, because I was level-headed and stayed out of trouble, but that didn't stop my parents from retrospectively punishing me for my older sister's mistakes. Our home was never truly happy. We screamed at one another to be taken seriously, had numerous fistfights, and would routinely be thrown out of the house for weekends to cool off with other family members before being sent back. I ended up getting kicked out at 18 for trying to have a life, and warrantably rebelling a little because I wasn't allowed the freedom to be a teenager in school. I never went back, which my parents weren't expecting. In the 10 years of estrangement, I worked tediously to improve my mental and emotional health after the years of abuse I endured at home. At one point, I worked in the same establishment as my mother and upheld clear boundaries with her that she wasn't my parent in that building, but nothing more than a co-worker, and couldn't try to hold authority over me in that role. She did not like this. I would have periods where I'd attempt to have a normal relationship with my parents, and they have never shown interest in me, and in fact treated me as if I was a blight, a burden in their way, or flat out wasting their time. In the last 2 years, I felt that I had actually gotten to a good place with them, in that my younger sibling was a teenager now, and I was still his confidant, and thought, okay, they finally see me as an adult. I even felt comfortable spending the night in their home again after years of not being there for more than 30 minutes at a time. A few months before I got engaged, I had inklings that it was coming and presumptively asked both parents for realistic expectations on their ability to help out if asked with a wedding. Both individually said yes, and I assured them I wouldn't wanted anything extreme. We fully intended to foot the bill for whatever they couldn't, because for once, something was absolutely going to be about me. And my partner, of course. But when we got engaged, and I sent my mother photos of my ring, the first thing she did was correct me for having it on the wrong hand, and then Congrats, my dad's wasn't much better in that. He said a flat congratulations text. In comparison, I was on the phone crying with my mother-in-law for a solid hour and a half afterwards, and spent 45 minutes each on the phone with 2 of my grandfathers. This of course stung, but wasn't anything out of the ordinary from how they acted towards me. In the following months, I had asked for the 4 of us to sit down and lay out a clear budget so that I could be realistic with my planning, and we could know how much we need to save up to put towards the wedding ourselves. Somehow all my mother heard was pay for everything every time I asked this. If I sent her something as a suggestion or an idea, I'd get a, "This is too expensive." "You're expecting too much," and the worst one, "We aren't the Rockefellers, all BC. My partner and I didn't want to get married in a barn or someone's backyard or elope. It got to a point where every interaction or attempt at one with her left me in tears, and my fiancé drew a line and said I had to cut them out, BC. They just weren't being nice to me, and it was destroying my mental health all over again. It's been 4 months since I drew that boundary with them, and neither one has reached out or attempted to make amends or even inquire about me in general. I had a major surgery and was on medical leave recovering. I still maintain relationships with my siblings, though my younger brother can't understand the strain my older sister and I have with our parents. BC, he's the golden child and the baby. My older sister, though maintaining a relationship with our parents, it is still tumultuous and primarily surrounding her children. My brother and I were talking today, and it was brought up that they likely aren't going to be invited to my wedding, BC, of their lack of communication and interest. They fully expect me fold on this decision, and I need to know if I would be the asshole if I don't. I want nothing more than to experience the love I feel for my parents, but I understand I can't expect me from others. It is just excruciating feeling disregarded as unimportant time and time again. BC, I made myself into the easy kid for them so that they could prioritize my brother's health and sister's behavior issues. I have dreamed of my wedding for as long as I can remember, like most little girls do, but I can't confidently say I'd have a good experience if I allowed them to be involved in any manner. And I know that once my extended family hears of their exclusion, I will receive a lot of questions and pushback. But both of my grandparents, though sad, support me in doing what's best for me, so I know if I do hold firm on this boundary, I won't be alone. I am also most likely their only child to get married as well. It just doesn't seem to be in the cards for my sister anytime soon, and my brother is set to join the military, so he also has low intentions of doing so in the future. So random internet strangers, am I the asshole for fully intending not to invite my parents to my wedding? Sorry for rambling, Def got emotional typing this out. OP is certainly not an a-hole for wanting to have peace of mind by not inviting her parents to her wedding. Her parents are really jerks for always showing dismissive behavior towards her, despite her attempts to have a positive relationship with them. Prioritizing her mental health and well-being is valid, especially when it comes to such an important milestone in her life. As for scores, I would rate OP 0, and OP's parents 2.5 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now jump on to the next story from Memphis Bali, who was accused of stealing headphones at Walmart. AITA for how I reacted when accused of stealing headphones at Walmart. I was at a Walmart self-checkout with about 12 items, including a pair of headphones. I scanned everything, including the headphones, but chose to skip bagging them, which is an option at self-checkout. As I was leaving the self-checkout, I nodded to a woman named Deborah, told her, "Have a nice day," and turned to check my cart out of habit, just to make sure everything was there. That's when her eyes lit up, and she ran up to me and stopped me specifically as I was approaching the exit. She asked to see my receipt, and when I asked why, she said it was to make sure I scanned the headphones since they weren't bagged. I skip bagging all the time, and this has never happened before. She claimed it was policy to check unbagged items, but I know that's not true because the self-checkout gives you the option to skip bagging. I calmly pointed this out, but she yelled, "I need a manager," with a big smile on her face, almost like she was trying to antagonize me. At that point, I raised my receipt to show her the headphones were scanned, but she tried to snatch it from me before I could even show her. I managed to hold onto it, and in an unfortunately rude tone, I said, "See? Headphones," pointing to the line on the receipt, and she was speechless. Then an elderly employee nearby started yelling at me, calling me an asshole and saying, "She's just doing her job. You're an asshole, dude. She's just doing her job." Which sucked, but he didn't know what happened before, and ultimately, her change in facial expression told me she felt kinda dumb for accusing me, which I kinda felt bad about. But wrong is wrong. Frustrated and reacting the way I did? Or was I over the line? I'm sure I could have avoided being rude by keeping my composure, and let her know what she doing has led to lawsuits and was a first for me, and that I'd advise a manager of this and that she needs more training, or just shown her the receipt in the beginning without handing it over and cut the nonsense short. But instead I said, "See? Headphones," with a disgusted look on my face. Anyways, you all be the judge. This happened in 2017, I believe. It was the first, but not the last time, being accused by a fellow minority. Sometimes darker complexions than me, but still prejudice. I don't know if it's the way I walked or dressed at the time, or social anxiety, making me look like a criminal to some. OP is not an AH, and her frustration is 100% justified. I cannot believe how rude and antagonistic Walmart staff are. It is really insulting to be accused of stealing something like headphones. The staff lady and old uncle are true jerks, and I would give them 3 out of 5 scores on the AH scale, and OP deserves none. Let's now move on to the next story from Gunsling 3 RZ. AITA for telling my mill that she shouldn't walk into my house at 1 a.m. to poop in the guest bathroom? The TLDR with us is that she's just an entitled, narcissistic asshole that has just never treated me as a human. She's called me a CU next Tuesday in front of a group of our closest friends and neighbors 4 to 5 times, twice on Mother's Day, because she didn't get her way. I'll be happy to answer any questions, but that's not the focus of this situation. Let's just agree she hates me and is just not a nice lady. So I live in FL, and my MIL followed her son here. She wants to have that unhealthy relationship with my son. I'm sure you have heard in the news that there have been a couple of hurricanes, Helene and Milton. In my town, we got major flooding from both. In Helene's case, it just missed her house with the water rising, but in Milton's case, it came a foot in her house. In other words, it essentially destroyed her home. She ended up moving into our RV in our driveway because she had no other option. I need to fill in that she's been a huge burden on our family since she's come here. We get she has nowhere to go, and we are very sympathetic on the situation. We 100% understand losing your home. We did after IAN. She was an AH 100% by telling us to F off after we lost our home. But we decided since she's his mom, we would be gracious and offer our camper so she had a place to stay, after her home was damaged from Helene due to flooding. For anyone living in a camper, you know you use minimal toilet paper and as much water as possible with the chemicals. In addition, you don't poop in there if you can't help it. In 4 days, the woman filled up a 30-gallon black water tank. Let's say I don't ask questions I don't want the answers to. But anyway, I let her know that's not normal, and there should be more water than there is toilet paper. I got 100% quiet, and I didn't even get to the point where you need to use special toilet paper, which I provided, in the tank. We are sitting at almost 2 weeks with his entitled, narcissistic person in my driveway. She got news from FEMA that they would pay for a hotel. So we are excited for that and talked to her about booking something and just left it at that. I left for a friend's house and my husband worked all night. MIL had access to the house and just made herself at home. Honestly, to me that's fine. She's alone in the living room. She and I had our conversations about my boundaries and she gaslights me that certain things didn't happen, but they did. And I just dismiss it because I know she has no power over me and she's an idiot. I just don't feed into the energy that you need to lie to everyone to get ahead in life, including friends, family, and your church. To be honest, his mom doesn't put me in any mood if you know what I mean. So after my husband and I spend time together, we hear the door close with her dog. She goes in the guest bathroom at 1 a.m. in the morning. We had just finally being intimate after a week of her interjecting herself into our lives. I yell out the audacity to walk into someone's home at 1 a.m. to take a shit. This was just after my husband and I had the courage to let our guard down with each other and finally get it on. The timing was almost like she was waiting for us to be done. It happened 30 seconds after we were done. I walk out and tell her she's in the wrong in walking in my house at 1 a.m., and that's what the camper bathroom is for. She then says, "You told me to poop in the house." I said, "Yeah, during the effing day." The woman found out today she has an allowance that gave her the ability to have a hotel tonight, and GTFO out of my house. Now I told the husband that I would book her a place tomorrow, but he's like, she needs to do that on her own. Yeah, this is a tomorrow talk. I chased her out of the house telling her walking into my house at 1 a.m. is an invasion of privacy. So am AITA for telling my mile that she's a for coming into my house unannounced to in my guest bathroom at 1 a.m.? OP is certainly not an AH for standing up and confronting her mother-in-law about using the guest bathroom unannounced at 1 a.m. OP's mother-in-law seems to be entitled, and her behavior is clearly intrusive. OP's frustration with her mother-in-law's messy behavior is completely justified, and her SIL is an AH. I would rate her at least 2 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now jump onto the next story from Tasukete Kuda, Sai 111. AITA for contacting my boyfriend's colleague without his consent? I'm not a great storyteller and I don't know which information are necessary, so to make the picture as close to the reality as possible, I'll try to include as many information as I think would be necessary to know. So I, 27F, and my boyfriend, 25M, went out with two of his colleagues and their partners last weekend. Let's call those couples. Couple A and Couple B. With Couple A, we went drinking before, but with Couple B, it was the first time hanging out together. I think the night went well, and we had a great time. We drank, but we were not too drunk, just so drunk to feel a little bit more happy and relaxed. At one point, Couple B went home, but Couple A and my boyfriend and me decided to go for another drink somewhere after that. I tried to be as sober as possible, but the other three drank a little bit too much, and everyone was feeling like vomiting towards the end. I stopped the party, as it really was dangerous, and I was worried for everybody. I went with my drunk boyfriend home, we lived together, and took care of him. He was so drunk that he could not walk, so he was just lying in front of a convenience store when it was cold outside, and I tried to take care of him as much as possible. When we came home, I was worried also for the other couple if they were okay, and wanted to know if they came home safely. I didn't have their contacts, so I searched this male friend that we were last with on my boyfriend's Instagram friends list and wrote a message asking him if they were okay. That is the first time speaking with them on socials, and I did not add him as a friend. I could not find the girl's profile. Then, a few days later, this friend told my boyfriend I contacted him, and this where the drama starts. When my boyfriend found out that I messaged him and he was going crazy. He just started to yell at me that how could be a stalker, to go through his friends list to find his friend and message him without his consent. He told me also that I am disgusting for doing that, and that they are his friends and not mine. From now on, every move I should try to do, I should report it to him. They didn't add me on any social, so I was not trying to force them to add me to be their friends or anything like that. I was just genuinely curious if they were okay after the hard parting, nothing more. After that message that I sent him, we did not have any conversations. Am I really the bad person for contacting this friend, or? I would like some opinion on that, because lately, I think I'm actually not a normal person. OP's is certainly not an AH for contacting her boyfriend's colleague, because she reached out to him out of concern for their well-being, not for any other purpose. OP's boyfriend's behavior is completely unreasonable, and he is an AH, and it would rate him 2 out of 5 on the AH scale, and OP gets 0. Welcome to AMI the A-hole story from Drama-Street 16, where OP's mom cheated on her father and had an out-of-wedlock child with her affair partner, leading to an intense family dilemma. Let's dive into it. Would I be an a-hole if I tell my dad it's his fault my brother doesn't want to see him? Sorry for the long thread, but I just need some advice. So, I, 24 years old F, am not new to Reddit, but I made this account so nobody from my personal life find this. Anyways, for a bit backstory, I grew up in a semi-normal household, until when I was 14, as my dad discovered my mom was cheating on him after she got pregnant by the affair partner. After that, they obviously got divorced, but my dad stopped talking to my brother, 22M, who was 12 at the time, as we found out that he knew about her affair. I was really mad at my brother for not telling us, and even to this day I kind of resent him, but I kind of learned to understand that he was just a child, afraid to ruin our family. My dad, on the other hand, never really forgave him. When we went to my grandma's house, my brother would try to talk to him and apologized, but my dad ignored him completely. Then around the time when I was 18, my dad got remarried and he had a baby boy. My brother also gave up trying to make amends with him altogether due to an incident that happened when we were at a family gathering at my grandparents' house. People were congratulating my dad and my stepmom as one of the guests mentioned, now he has 2 boys to protect me, whatever that meant. My dad, however, responded in front of my bother that he only has 1 son, and the people around us kind of went quiet, some looking at my brother, as my stepmom scolded my dad for saying that, and to his defense, he did seem a bit guilty. And after that night, my brother stopped coming to my grandma's house altogether and never spoke to my dad again. Now for the main problem, it's been a few years, and my brother, now 22, recently ended up in the hospital due to a bad car crash when a drunk driver hit his car. He was in the ICU for a while and almost died, but is doing a bit better now, but had to get hip reconstruction and is still recovering. When my dad found out, he came rushing into the hospital But my mom and my brother's boyfriend didn't let him see my brother, as mom reminded my dad he and my brother haven't talked in years, and that my brother doesn't want to see him. It was a lot of arguing, until eventually my dad was asked to leave. I went with him, as he said sobbing he just wanted to see his son, and has kept coming to the hospital to see my brother, but is always met with the same outcome. I really feel for my dad, I really do. But at the same time, I think he needs to understand he and my brother no longer have a relationship due to what happened years ago. I feel that I would be a bit harsh to tell him it's his fault because at the end of the day, mom did cheat on him, and my brother knew, so dad obviously had the right to be angry, but at the same time he treated my brother bad, so it's obvious why my brother doesn't want to see him. What should I do? Please, I need some advice on how to handle this situation. Update. Hi, so I'm back. I came here a few days ago and I didn't expect to update so soon, but some things have happened in the past few days since the day I posted, and first and foremost, my brother knows dad wants to see him. I kind of brought up the topic a few hours after I made this post and told him dad has been coming to the hospital a lot. My brother didn't really say much about it and just told me to tell dad to leave. Me and his boyfriend also talked as I asked him if maybe he could convince my brother to talk to dad, but he told me he won't force my brother to do something he doesn't want to, and that right now my brother is not well enough to think about seeing my father, so it basically ended in that. I saw some of you pointed out how I blamed my brother, and I admit and take full responsibility that it was wrong on my part to blame my brother. Yes, I did resent him, and I feel so guilty about it looking back now, but I never once treated him badly or told him it was his fault. I was an angry teen who didn't know how to handle her family falling apart, but now I understand my mistake. Also, I did not abandon him like one of you said. When my parents divorced, both me and my brother stayed with our mom, as she had gotten full custody since dad wasn't in a good headspace. But we did go to grandma's house where he lived every other weekend. Due to the reality check I was given by some of you, I and my brother did talk a little more after the conversation I had with his BF. And I apologized for ever holding a resentment towards him. He told me it was okay and that he knew he should have told us about the affair, but he was scared. I low-key just broke down when he said that because it made me realize he also blamed himself for something I now realize wasn't his fault. We both cried a lot as it was the first time we actually talked about the affair and how it made us feel. I apologized a lot, and my brother forgave me and comforted me, telling me it wasn't my fault, which honestly made me cry more because I honestly didn't deserve his forgiveness or kindness. Despite what many of you might think, I do love my brother and won't force him to see our dad. We basically only had each other when the divorce happened, as mom was too busy with her pregnancy and her affair partner, and dad was too depressed to do anything and wouldn't even see us and stayed at our grandma's house. As for my dad, one of you suggested he writes my brother a letter. I told him about it and he said he'll think about it. We kinda had a long talk. I asked him why he treated my brother so badly back then as he began crying. He told me that over this past few days he has been reflecting a lot and finally realized, or as he said it, accepted the truth, that he let out his anger in the wrong person. We finally talked about the affair, something I thought would never happen, as he never spoke about it. None of us did TBH. He told me how it really hurt him what mom did, and when he found out my brother knew, he kinda just shut down and didn't know how to react. He and my brother have always had a strong relationship before the affair, and that's why my dad felt betrayed in a way. This is where I think I might have been too harsh, but I asked if that's the reason why he said in front of everyone, my brother wasn't his son. I know some of you told me to not point fingers, but I couldn't help myself, as I was the one that comforted my brother that day. My dad told me that he and stepmom actually got in an argument after that incident, as she didn't like the way he spoke about my brother. He said that's when he kinda started to realize his actions were wrong, but my brother stopped showing up after that. So dad thought it was better for both of them to move on from this. He told me that he knew from all those years ago that he was wrong for saying that, and that he should have talked to my brother, but his pride was too big. He told me how he wished he had said something all those years ago, because now it took for his son almost died for dad to finally set his pride aside. I told him that unfortunately, he made the decision for both himself and my brother to move on and go no contact. So now, these are the consequences. I know I was a bit harsh, but I feel he also needed to understand these are unfortunately the consequences of his actions. We talked and cried a bit more, and he also apologized to me, as he said he knew I basically became the parent for my brother and little sister, Mom's affair baby, because Mom was too busy with her affair partner and other boyfriends she had after she broke up with the affair partner, and Dad was too depressed to act like a father. He told me that neither I nor my brother deserved what he and my mom did, and he is sorry that it took for this to happen in order for him to wake up. But yeah, for now that is the update. Honestly, I don't know if my brother wants to see him, and after I myself getting a reality check on how I contributed to all this, I don't blame my brother and won't force him into seeing Dad. This is probably the last update I do unless something major happens. But not all is lost, as even if my brother and Dad never talk at least from all this, I did learn an important lesson thanks to some of the comments. I will say though that although some of the comments left were harsh, they were definitely a wake-up call for me to realize that if I don't want to lose my brother, I need to work on myself and fix whatever trauma I had left from my parents' divorce. It also made me realize that I definitely gave my dad too much grace. Back then, although I did think my dad was harsh with my brother, I never said anything, as I thought that he had a right due to my brother knowing about the affair. I now know that was wrong, and that my father is an awful person for doing that to my brother. I just didn't realize it, because I saw my dad as a victim of my mother's affair. My brother has every right to not see him as a father, and as many of you said, Dad now has to face the consequences of his actions. OP is not an AH for showing mirror to her father. Instead, OP's father is an AH, a big AH for trying to punish his son for what he never did. The actual culprit was his wife. As for scores, I would rate OP's dad 3.5 out of 5 on the AH scale, and OP's mom gets 4.5 out of 5, and OP lies on 0. Let's now jump on to the next Am I the Butthole story from top_sound 3762, where OP's sister-in-law is the ex-girlfriend of her fiancé, and now she wants to spoil their relationship with below-the-belt tactics. Sister-in-law is bitter. Her ex proposed to me, and this got her banned from our family. AITA for this? This may be a little confusing, but I will try to make it as clear as possible. My 27F fiancé's ex is now my older brother's wife, so my SEL. To make it less confusing, my fiancé is George, my brother is David, and my SEL is Ella. George, 38M, briefly dated Ella, 34F, 4 years ago. Ella wanted to get married and have kids, but George did not want this with her. He was also having a lot of issues back then, partying, doing drugs, and not being the most reliable person. They dated for 6 months, and everything ended in drama because Ella was not able to make George want to settle with her. Soon after their breakup, she met my brother, and they got married 6 to 7 months after. So yeah, they moved really fast. And basically, Ella dated her ex, broke up with him, met my brother, and got married to him. Everything in only 1 year and a couple of months. I met George 2 years ago, and at that time, Ella was already married to my bro. Back then, I had no idea that George was Ella's ex. When George started to feel attracted to me, he changed completely. He quit drinking and doing drugs. He has been sober ever since. Started going to therapy, and overall became a new person. He did this because he wanted to change, and I have been with him during his entire healing journey. I am very proud of him, and we have a healthy and amazing relationship. Even if Ella was already married to my brother, she was furious when she found out I was dating George and that he was serious with me. She was so cruel and said a lot of nasty lies. She used to tell everyone that George was grooming me. I was 25 when we became a thing, and he was 36. This is not grooming. She lied that George was abusing me, trying to get me to become an addict like him and many other things. This ruined my relationship with my brother because he never did anything to make her stop. George and I announced our engagement to my family last week during my dad's birthday. My parents were happy for us, but Ella said, "It must be nice to be the one to get the ring after someone else struggled to fix him." Again, no reaction from my brother as usual. My parents told her to stop, but I just snapped and told her something along the lines, "He fixed himself, you POS. And yes, it is nice to know I will be married to the man I love more than anything, and who loves me the same. But how is it for you knowing that no one else except my idiot brother ever wanted to marry you? Does it feel nice?" My parents kicked them out after this. They told her that everybody had enough of her BS. She is insane because although being married, she is still bitter over the fact that her ex did not want her. She is officially banned from every family event, and my brother is now blaming me. So AITA in this situation? I don't think I am, honestly, but I want to also hear some unbiased perspective. Update. This update will be very long, so if you don't want to waste time reading the first part, you can skip directly to the actual update. Thank you so much for all you comments and reaching out to me. I don't know what I accepted when I posted. I guess I wanted to receive some unbiased feedback from an outside perspective, but I never expected this. I was really overwhelmed with how kind and nice most of you were, so once again, thank you and sorry for not being able to reply to all the comments. For those who were not on the same page, I understand and respect that you have a different opinion. From my initial post, I have left out a lot of details because it's a long story, but some of you were curious about what actually happened and asked me to provide more details, so buckle up, I will do just that. How I met my future husband. I got asked a lot if I live in a trailer park or small town with only a bar available. The answer is no. We actually live in a big city with a population of a couple millions of people. I met my fiancé through a mutual friend. My girlfriend was dating one of George's colleagues, and they all began to hang out for drinks after work since they were all in the same building. At some point, I had no plans for that day, and my girlfriend invited me to go with them to a bar, and this is how we were introduced. After this, we started having different group activities together, and things slowly progressed. George targeted his ex's younger SIL to spite her / There was no coincidence that we started dating. As absurd as it may sound, it was indeed an ironic coincidence. You may think out of the millions of people there are in a city, what are the chances for you to start dating your SIL's ex? Well, it happened to me, and we did not know about it in the beginning. The girlfriend that asked me to go with them to a bar did not know Ella, never saw her IRL, and she never saw her with George. When George met me, he had no idea that I had any connection to Ella, so there was no chance for him to be an evil mastermind and intentionally date me just to spite her. I did not take George home to meet my family immediately either. Maybe I am the weird one, but I was never the type to parade my boyfriends in front of my parents if I was not sure the relationship was going to last. I broke the girls' code. I do not consider that I did. Let's be clear, I have a couple of true friends. They have been my friends for many years, and I would do anything for them. I am a very loyal person, and I know the girls' code very well. When we eventually found out the connection Ella had with both of us, I was shocked, and I asked the same question that many of you did. What were the chances? It was a very uncomfortable position to be in. Even though I had no relationship with Ella, except the obvious one of her being my SEL, it was strange to know that they dated. I wanted to find out what happened before taking any decision, and I did. The way I saw things, there was no reason for me to punish George for having a past. We were in love, we were happy, and Ella was already married to my brother. I may have been selfish, but I thought, is this man and our relationship worth it? And the answer was yes. To me, he was, is, and will always be worth it. Also, we see my brother and Ella only a couple of times / year. Most of the times, for obvious reasons, we prefer to visit my parents separately. George's addictions. So many of you reached out to me being concerned about this, and I wanted to thank you for caring and say I am sorry you had to go through traumatic experiences with addicts. Some of your stories were hard to read, and I appreciate immensely that you were open to share your experiences with a stranger. I understand why most of you were triggered by my story, but George was not that type of addict. He had a lot of unresolved trauma. He was lonely, unloved, and ashamed, so his coping mechanism were parties, alcohol, and drugs. His entourage was also not the best. You can imagine that a bunch of 36-years-old party boys / girls are no good, but at the end of the day, when everyone else went home to their families, wives, and kids, these were the people who could provide company to George. I think it was more like all of them providing company to each other so they could feel less lonely. But other than this, George was a functional adult. He had a stable, well-paying job. He was and is still working as a software engineer. He was never violent, etc. George changed for me. No, George changed for himself, and because he wanted to. He told me that I was the trigger that made him want to get his life in order, but in a more meaningful way than just wanting to get into my pants. When we started hanging out as a group with my friend and his colleague, he learned how easy it was to interact and have fun without drugs or alcohol. He also saw that I enjoyed spending time with him. I looked forward to seeing him every time, and he understood that his sober self is not unlovable. He was longing for healthy relationships and normality, but until that moment he felt like he was not deserving to have them. I think the way I helped him was solely because I saw and fell in love with his true self, and that gave him confidence and purpose. I am the golden child. There is no such thing in our family. My parents love my brother and I the same. Of course, when they heard Ella's BS the first time, they were worried for me, but I was open with them. I told them how things happened. George was honest and never hid his troubled past from them, and in the end, they were okay with our relationship. My parents trust me, trust my judgment, and they only want to see me happy. And in regards to Ella, my parents are just doing what every parent should, defend their child. She was warned before. My parents talked to her, asked her to stop acting like this, and told her she is out of line, so it's not like they kicked her out the first time it happened. Now, into the update. Yesterday I contacted my brother and asked him to meet me for coffee. It was only the two of us, and I think it was the first time I have opened my heart like this in front of him. I started off by apologizing for him being caught in the middle, but I told him I will never apologize or be sorry for loving George. I was honest and told him how much this situation has been affecting me. My brother is the same age as my fiancé, so he is 11 years older than me. During our childhood, he was my protector, the person I looked up to. Due to our age difference, we never really had many activities in common, and I could not wait for the moment I grow up, so I can get to share more with my brother as adults. But I did not get the chance to do this because of Ella. David would always teach me to value myself, to choose people who treat me right and make me happy. However, I am not able to share my happiness with him anymore. I understand why he would wish I never met George, but it still hurts knowing that your brother somehow resents the source of your happiness. David would always defend me when I was younger, even in front of our parents. When I was 15, I was experimenting with makeup, and it looked bad, really bad. During a family function, one of our uncles got drunk and told me to stop using makeup because I was too young to look like a hooker. David got mad and kicked him out for offending his sister. This is the kind of brother he used to be, and to now see how he stays aside and allows his wife to be offensive and cruel, it's really hurtful. I do not care that she is like that towards me. I don't like Ella at all, and I could easily ignore her. But what gets to me the most is she constantly trying to belittle and humiliate my future husband. I have lived with this man for 2 years. I have shared so many things with him during this time, and I am certain I know better what kind of man he is. I know how hard it was for him to heal all his trauma. I know how hard he worked day by day to become the best version of himself. I know how much he loves me, protects me, supports me, and I simply lose it when I hear her crap, and how she is constantly trying to bring him down. Yes, I go bear mode when he is involved, as someone told me in the comments, but I don't care. I will not allow any of my family members to abuse the person I love. I may have tolerated things for my brother's sake, but I will never be quiet in front of his of a wife. I told my brother that I love him, and I will always cherish the memories I have with him, but we cannot go on like this. I understand he is a victim, and I am ready to do anything for him if he is willing to accept that his marriage is not good, that Ella is not a good woman and is abusing him. I cannot force him to divorce her because this has to be his choice, but I told him I will accept his decision no matter what that is. He will always be my brother, but George is my family now. We plan on having kids in the near future, and there is no way in hell I will ever allow his lunatic of a wife to be near my kids. I also refuse to subject George to the abuse. We tried. We thought that this rough period will eventually pass, and that everything will be okay. But unfortunately, Ella became more and more bitter and disgusting. We will still see my parents, but I am standing my ground and will not go to their house if she is present. David and I cried a lot, and for the first time in many years, I felt like I had my brother back. He apologized over and over again, and explained a lot of things to me, which gave me the chance to understand him better. But at the same time, I am so angry that I had no idea what was happening to my brother. Some people said that David was a rebound for Ella, but it seems they were both a rebound for the other. What made them marry so fast was the age pressure. My brother was feeling like it was very hard to connect with someone, and the prospect of being able to have a family of his own seemed very far away, until Ella came and offered him the possibility to have exactly what he wanted without too much struggle. So yeah, In the end, I guess we are all some messed up people in a way or another. I don't know what's going to happen. David said he plans to take some time, go away alone for a couple of days, and think what he wants to do. But he said that when he'll be back, he wants to have a chat with George to apologize to him as well for everything that has happened. My brother knows that everything Ella says is false. He said everyone is able to see how much George loves me and that we make a great couple, and there are times when he wished to also have something like this in his life. He told me he is proud of the woman I have become and that no matter what happens, I will always be his little sister. After this, I went home and cried some more with George besides me. I have tried to play strong and denied myself to feel hurt for so long that yesterday I have finally exploded. But it was good because now I feel better. OP is not an AH here. Her sister-in-law manipulated the situation, spreading false accusations by making cruel comments about OP and her fiancé's relationship. That's why she got banned from family gatherings. OP's sister-in-law is an AH for continually getting herself involved in others' matters. So, I would rate her 2 out of 5 on the AH scale, and OP gets 0. Let's move on to the next story form, illustrious-sky-713, where OP's friend cancelled wedding venue 2 weeks before the date. AITA for wanting truth revealed after a friend cancelled wedding venue 2 weeks before the date. Okay, so I'll try to keep this short, but in a timeline that is accurate. We have been friends with another couple for 3 years. Let's call them Adam and Sarah. Back in January, my fiancé started working for them in their dog training business. And in February, we all agreed to have our wedding on their personal residence, and where they run their, now found illegal, dog business. We shook hands and agreed on a price, $800, and started planning. 2.5 months before the wedding, Adam texts us and says, "Hey guys, I guess you're having your wedding here because it's our address on the invitation." I said, "Yes, of course it is. We agreed on this months ago." He said, "Okay, well, we haven't received 50% deposit, so it has not been confirmed." I'm like, WTH, but I just say, "Okay, I'll send you the money." Cool, done. When we shook hands, we agreed to get a special event permit as this residence is out in the middle of the desert. There are neighbors who have called the cops on the previous owner for throwing huge parties and loud music. Adam said, "Okay." 4 weeks before the wedding, we took them to dinner, and he expresses concerns about music and the permit. He said he doesn't want a permit. We suggest he talks to his neighbors. He is against it. He said he would need us to end the party at dark, 6 p.m., and Sarah stood up for us. She said it is the biggest day of our lives, and that is a ridiculous idea. 10 p.m. will be fine. The permit is to allow 50-plus people and protect from complaints and cops showing up. We have 65 people total. 2 weeks prior, we schedule a time to walk the property and go over last details. They haven't expressed any or much of their needs at this point, other than allowing us freedom to plan as we wish and telling us whatever they can do to make our day excellent, let them know. Awesome friends, right? Nope. At the meeting, they tell us nobody is allowed inside to use the restroom. We will need facilities. I tell them it's so soon, and it will be hard to find that. They say, "Oh well." Then, he tells us again we need to end at 6 p.m., but now agrees to get a permit. We are at the limit to do that. The next day, we receive a text message and voice memo. They are canceling our venue and will refund our money. Absolutely zero compassion. Just, "We want you to have the best day ever, and our land won't allow that." Adam calls me and tells me how good this will be. My soon-to-be wife is in tears. He tells me we are not the victims, and he's doing a good thing. What the actual My family is traveling to Arizona from North Carolina, and hers from California and Hawaii. Everyone has flights, accommodations, etc. Not only are we faced with replanning our wedding just 2 weeks out, but also my fiancé has to quit her job. I mean, who can work for someone who could do that to someone? I am not a revengeful person, but we live in a small spiritual town, and these people claim to be abundant business owners and coaches, pillars for the community, people who stand in integrity, and this is not it. They spoke when they cancelled about not being bothered if we come out publicly. I think this was a front because it scares the shit out of them. AITA for wanting people who are looking to do business with them to know what kind of people they are, reporting their illegal business practices. I do not want to get into a legal battle, but this has been a really hard situation. OP is not an AH here. He's just trying to reveal the reality of his so-called friends who messed up their wedding by cancelling the venue at the 11th hour. The way they cancelled their wedding venue just a few days before their wedding is unjustified, because OP's guests were from other states, and it would embarrass them in front of all their guests. OP's so-called friends are jerks, and I would rate them 2.5 out of 5 on the scale, and OP and his fiancée get none. Let's now jump onto the next story from dorsal_12, where OP cuts off with her dysfunctional family, and now her sisters are blaming her for prioritizing herself over the family. AITA for telling my mom it is not my fault she stayed with my father, and that I shouldn't be the one suffering from it. I, 30F, grew up in a dysfunctional family. My father is a narcissist with alcohol and gambling addictions, which started when I was in my teens. My mother has suffered from depression for 20 years, with ups and downs. My father was always verbally abusive toward my mother and us children. Since developing his gambling addiction, things have only gotten worse. He started lying and neglecting basic needs, like food or rent. We were even kicked out of our homes twice. He used up all our savings, and even sold my mother's gold jewelry to fuel his addiction. The worst part is that he still blamed everything on my mother, trying to manipulate us kids into thinking she was a bad mom, and he was the victim. Because money was always an issue, and at the time, my mom only worked as a cleaning lady. My sisters and I had to start working long hours when we were just 13. After school, I worked as a waitress, and, during school holidays, I worked almost every day. At times, I even had 3 jobs at once. As I grew older, I began speaking up to my father, calling out his lies and everything he had done to us. I protected my mom every time he tried to blame her, but she always tried to silence me, telling me I couldn't talk to my father that way. We begged her to leave him because we couldn't take it anymore. The constant anxiety, waiting for the next bad thing to happen, not knowing which bill to pay or where the money for the next meal would come from. Those who grew up like this will understand. But she wouldn't leave him because of my youngest brother. She said he would be traumatized growing up without a father. So, apparently one son was more important than 4 daughters who were suffering. Despite everything, I somehow managed to finish school with great grades and moved an hour away for university. I worked hard to support myself and sent money to my mom. I came back almost every weekend to help her with housework, finances, and just to listen to her. Even though I couldn't stand being at home, the very thought of home put me in fight or flight mode, I went back for her. Years passed, and my mother completed a nursing course and found a job with a good income. She could live comfortably, pay bills, and even save money. This made my father stop contributing anything to the household at all, because she handled it all. He lived his own life, had affairs, and lost all his money to gambling, while my mother took care of everything at home. Not only did she pay for everything, she also cooked for him, washed his clothes, etc., and barely called him out or asked him to do his part. I constantly argued with my father because of this. I told my mom to stop everything for him until he contributed something, but she never listened. My brother grew up and turned into a version of my father. He expects my mother to do everything, only works occasionally, and when he does, he never gives my mom any money. He's become aggressive toward us girls, and even tried to fight me once when I confronted him about living off our mom. After he tried to physically fight me, I cut off contact with him. My mother just stood there crying, and the next day, she cooked for him as if nothing had happened. Every time I go home, she complains about how those two make her life miserable, and I tell her it's up to her to speak up and stop doing everything for them. But then she gets angry at me for saying that. 2 years ago, I met the sweetest guy, and we're getting married next year. He's not only the most handsome man I've ever seen, but he also has the kindest heart. He loves me deeply, is caring, and understanding. My mom always makes a point of letting me know that my fiancé is out of my league and I should never criticize him and always do what he wants. But that is not how I plan my life. We have a healthy relationship and talk about everything. I've also met his parents, who are just wonderful. His mother, like mine, also suffers from depression, but I feel so welcomed and free to be myself around them. I often wonder how my life turned out if I had parents like this. My life has changed dramatically. I feel loved, supported, and at peace, something I've never felt before. That is, until I have to see or talk to my parents. Recently, things escalated when my parents and brother were moving. My brother didn't lift a finger to help with his own move. I asked my mom to tell him to help out, instead of letting his sisters do everything, but she got angry at me, saying I always caused problems and that he wouldn't listen to her. That wasn't the point. I just wanted her to speak up for once in her life, but she failed me again. I told her how I spent the best years of my life working myself to exhaustion for her when I could have been enjoying my youth, and how she never had my back. Every time things got hard, she chose not to stand up for her daughters because she didn't want the stress. But I didn't want it either. I didn't choose this life or this father. It's not my fault she chose to stay with him. I told her how disappointed I was that she did everything for my brother while he exploited her. I couldn't take it anymore. I told her she lost a daughter, and things would never go back to how they were. Since then, I've avoided going home, and we rarely speak. As guilty as I feel admitting it, my life is so peaceful now. I'm finally doing things I couldn't before, feeling motivated, and even started my master's degree. My sister urges me to talk to my mom and reconcile, but that's the last thing I want to do. I understand my mom had a horrible life and that her depression played a huge role in her behavior. As a woman, I feel deeply sorry for her and wish her so much that she deserves a better life. But as a daughter, all I feel is pain and disappointment. Why did she put all her burdens on us and expect us to never complain? Shouldn't she want a better life for her daughters? OP is not an AH here. Rather, her mom is an AH who never stood up for herself and never cared about the well-being of her daughters and herself. Her mom seems to be an ancient soul who prioritizes her son over her daughters. OP's frustration is 100% justified, and she is not in the wrong for cutting ties with her dysfunctional family. So OP is not an AH here, and I would give her 0 out of 5 on the AH scale. As for OP's mom, she is an AH, and I would rate her 2 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now move towards the last story from Will You Still Love Me 6-4, where OP's wife is trying to claim his late brother-in-law's estate, despite the fact that he had excluded her from his will. AITA, because I am going against my wife and trying to prevent her deceased brother's estate from being plundered? My brother-in-law recently passed away from illness. He was a good man. Honest, hardworking, and self-made. He was a bachelor and never had kids. My wife, his sister, is made of the same stuff. She too is a hardworking, honest, and good woman. Much of the rest of her family are, in my opinion, a bunch of freeloaders. My mother-in-law is 90 years old and lives off her meager social security income. She lives in a rundown home in a rough neighborhood, but she is healthy and makes do. My sister-in-law lives with mom. She hasn't worked a day in the 15 years I have known her, supposedly has a heart condition, but smokes and drinks, and she lives off her mom's income. In addition, she uses mom's credit card to shop online and has run up tens of thousands of dollars in credit card debt that mom can't afford to pay. Her son, our nephew, is 45 years old and has never held down a job for any length of time in his life. He grew up living in his grandparents' home with his mom and now lives with and off his girlfriend. His 90-year-old grandmother still even pays some of his bills for him out of her social security income. The way these people take advantage of my Emile makes me sick. My wife and I are decently successful, and we pay lots of mom's bills and frequently send her groceries and other items my wife shops for online. When she needs a new stove or refrigerator or air conditioner or water heater or whatever, we foot the bill. We are happy to help mom, but we know we are indirectly helping her parasite family members as well. My brother-in-law has an estate worth about $300,000, a modest and rundown house, a couple of old cars, and some money in the bank. Before he passed, he came to us and asked us to help him get his affairs in order. He wanted his estate to help his mom live the rest of her life comfortably, and he was afraid that the other family members would plunder it. He too was bothered by the way his family members took advantage of his mom, and he hoped we could help prevent that from happening. We helped him get a will, powers of attorney, and a trust. He made my wife and me co-trustees so that we could make decisions together, and so that my wife would not be emotionally pressured by her family to make decisions against his wishes. As a non-blood relative, and as one who is more critical of the abuse, my BIL counted on me to help keep his wishes followed. Now fast forward to today. My wife told me that her mum wants to give one of my BIL's vehicles to this freeloading nephew. It's a restored old vehicle worth about $25 to $30K. No good for driving, it's a collector's car. Mom doesn't really understand the details of BIL's estate even though we've tried to explain it to her. I told my wife that the vehicle isn't Mom's to give. It's ours to sell and use the money for Mom. To paint her house, buy her a new car, haul off junk, and get numerous repairs done to the house. And that her brother definitely would not have wanted it to go to his freeloading nephew. Unfortunately, my wife has already been emotionally swayed by her family, exactly what my BIL did not want to happen. I told her this, but she said, "It's not my decision, it's hers, because he was her brother, not mine. My position and wishes are second to hers." I got angry, and we had the biggest argument of our entire relationship. I told her, this is BS, and exactly the opposite of what her brother wanted. And that's why he asked me to be a co-trustee, and that as such, she can't make decisions about his estate unilaterally. But now, I am the angry jerk who she thinks is being controlling. But I think I am trying to honor my BIL's wishes and do what's best for Mom. Should I stand back and let my wife be influenced by her family to go against her brother's wishes? Or should I stand my ground, enforce my authority as co-trustee, and be at odds with my wife over this? There is no financial benefit to us either way. AITA? TLDR. My brother-in-law died and asked me to help prevent his estate from being plundered. And now my wife is being emotionally pressured to allow this plundering and she is caving in. Should I stand my ground and AITA if I do? OP is not an AH here. He's just trying to fulfill his late brother-in-law's wishes by selling his car to support his mother. So, I would rate OP's wife 2.5 out of 5, and OP 0 out of 5 on the AH scale. What do the Mac Reddit fans think? Is the OP an AH or not? Let me know in the comment section below. If you like the stories I brought you, just hit the like button, share them as much as you can, and don't forget to subscribe to Mac Reddit for a daily dose. Bye bye, see you tomorrow with some more spicy fries.